All right, what's going on? Drive time Tuesday afternoon. We're looking at about 13 minutes past the hour of 2 o'clock, 92 degrees, hot and sunny here in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah on this August Tuesday afternoon. And as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic, Porter Larson behind the glass, jam-packed Tuesday show. Good guest list on tap, a lot of college football conversation as we are just over 3 weeks away from the start of the season for the University of Utah. Week 0 will take place before that. And college football essentially is here. As your home of the Utes, we'll have the best coverage of Utah football all year long as Camp Kyle rolls along. Week 2 up on the hill for the Utes. And down south, BYU continues to look for their quarterback. We'll talk about the latest with that. BYU picks up another big-time basketball commit yesterday, a 4-star kid out of our state, local recruit. So Kevin Young continues to build his staff. And year 1 for Alex Jensen in the Big 12. What's that going to look like? Of course, a lot of college football, but we are right on the precipice of college basketball as well. Off-season NBA stuff, pretty quiet as of now. That certainly could change, as we saw not too long ago when the Jazz decided to move on from the group that brought us a really fun 8-9-year stretch with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. I think Donovan was traded in September, if I remember correctly, and Bogdanovich was traded even after that. So not a lot of NBA offseason stuff. But we will do a little NBA today. We got one of our favorite NBA guests in studio. So a lot to do on the program today. Some contract news in the world of pro football that we'll get to. Kerwin Williams gets a 3-year, $33 million extension with the Rams. Teddy Bridgewater's on his way to Tampa Bay. So a little NFL offseason news on the program today. From a local standpoint, RSL is back in action tomorrow. Midweek clash in the Leagues Cup. I think it's the Leagues Cup, Nations Cup, whatever it is. A lot of cups in that sport. And then back to MLS play on Saturday in New York. And Pablo Mastroeni joined us yesterday. We talked about the 2 new additions. We'll kind of get to know them a little bit on the program today. We'll see if they're available either tomorrow or Saturday as reinforcements on the way for Pablo Mastroeni and Real Salt Lake. So a lot to do on the show. Good to have you guys along for the ride. We'll start things off today with Kyle Bonagura. Kyle Bonagura covers college football and soccer for ESPN, and he just released a podcast series, and I read the story that they attached to it this morning, and it is a fascinating story about Paul Wolf and the disappearance of his mother. Paul was the head coach of Washington State for a number of years. So we'll do some college football. I want to talk to Kyle about this project, though. It's definitely worth your time. It's a pretty intriguing story. So Kyle will be our first guest. Spencer Litton, our buddy from BYU TV, will stop by. The latest on the quarterback battle down south. We'll do some Big 12 football, some college football with Spencer. Dave Bartu, the college football matrix. We'll talk some college football and some Big 12 and some Utes with Dave today. And if you know Dave Bartu, we're about to get weird on a Tuesday afternoon because you never know where our guy is. He could be elk hunting, selling gummies, running one of his restaurants. He's a fascinating dude, so we'll bring him in today. And then it's our weekly conversation with Richard Smith. 40 years with the Jazz front office. We'll talk some NBA offseason, and the approach of the NBA season is actually also on tap. No dunk contest in the All-Star weekend, according to Shams Charania. They're going to replace it with a one-on-one contest, which is pretty interesting. Once upon a time, the dunk contest was like the number one thing to watch out for. So we'll do some NBA offseason with Smitty today. Kyle Bonagura, Spencer Litton, Dave Bartu, Richard Smith, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners, and that guy, Porter Larson, on a Tuesday afternoon. The headband look. I'm a proponent of the headband look. Is this a new thing for you? So,
oh, no. Just
tune into YouTube.
I just forgot my hat at the studio.
And you can watch this hippie, this dirty hippie, produce my show today. What's the motivation for the headband look today?
I just forgot the hat. If you see me like not here, probably wearing the headband because I have too much hair. Usually have like a hat or I don't know, something else on. Didn't bring it, so yeah, I got the headband. Sorry. Gym gear, I guess.
Wait a second. We have some breaking news.
What's that?
The Utah Jazz just traded for George Niang.
Ooh, that's big. That's blockbuster.
The minivan comes home. Some breaking news to start things off on a Tuesday. Shams tweets out the Boston Celtics. There's our cheesy breaking news sounder. Budget issues have forced us to use a corny breaking news sounder. According to Shams Charania from ESPN, the Boston Celtics are trading George Niang and 2 future second-round picks to the Utah Jazz for R.J. Luis Jr. The Celtics ultimately are punting on the season. It is a pivot year as Jason Tatum is recovering from a torn Achilles. And George Niang is coming home. The minivan returns to Salt Lake City. According to Shams, the salary goes into the John Collins trade exception, and they also get 2 additional draft assets. And the move allows the Celtics to have more salary relief below the second apron. So the Jazz get George Niang, who is a great guy, but not a great basketball player, and a couple more second-round picks to add to that treasure trove of draft assets that they have at their disposal. Now the challenge is to turn those draft picks into good basketball players. Breaking news. There you go. There's your analysis. So opening tip time on the program. We're going to bring in Kyle Bonagura today to talk college football. Spencer Litton, Dave Bartu, Richard Smith. Some unexpected breaking news that George Niang is coming home. The minivan returns to Salt Lake City. The Jazz had that trade exception with the John Collins situation, so they'll absorb George's salary into that and then get a couple of more second-round picks to add to the treasure trove of draft capital they have. So there you go. Certainly not the way I planned on starting the show today, and it's certainly not groundbreaking. We'll get Smitty's take on this coming up in just a little bit. But yesterday was the release in the world of college football of the coaches poll, of the AP coaches poll, the USA Today coaches poll. We talked about this during Crosstalk with Sean today. As it is early August, it is ranking season, it's poll season, it's preseason prognostication season. And a couple years ago, when we were debating the merit of this coaches poll, I texted a coach in state, and I will leave his name off air because I told him it would be off the record. And I said, in all of your years of being a head coach in the world of college football, have you ever filled out this top 25 poll? He emphatically said no. I always delegate it. So I don't really know what to make of it. Next week, so 6 days from today, the AP poll will come out. And at least the AP poll, for the most part, involves media members that actually study these things, media members that actually pay attention. Of course, the landscape of college football has changed quite a bit, with most teams having roster changeover of 40, 50, 60, sometimes more than that, 70%. Utah State with a brand new cast. I mean, so many teams ultimately don't look anything like they did the year before. And Utah is kind of in that spot, obviously with a new quarterback and a new offensive coordinator and a grip of transfers on both sides of the ball. But the fact of the matter is the coaches aren't necessarily dialed into this thing. So it is fodder for conversation, and it certainly is proof that college football is right around the corner. So BYU at 23 in the AP poll, which I found somewhat interesting. I think it's certainly indicative of the overall scope of the program Kalani has built, and then the team actually being pretty stacked in certain areas. I thought the Retzlaff stuff might more adversely affect the preseason opinion of BYU, and to be fair, in some polls, it has. And if you want kind of a hint at what the AP poll is going to look like, you can go look at Brett McMurphy's top 25 poll. Joel Klatt has released his. A lot of other outlets have released theirs. And there's a lot of variance because ultimately nobody knows. As I say every single year, the first 3 or 4 games of the college football season for me, observation, not conclusion. I need at least 3 or 4 games. Now, the tricky, both the tricky and the exciting thing about college football is it is the ultimate sprint. I think it's what makes it as popular as it is. Even the NFL, as it has expanded its calendar, you know, you get 4 or 5 more games in pro football. College football, you got to hit the ground running. So for Utah, I think it'll be more applicable to kind of analyze who they are after the non-con is behind them, because it's kind of a soft non-con for the Utes this year at the Rose Bowl against UCLA, 25 days away, home against Cal Poly, where Cal Poly receives a check in exchange for those poor kids to get their heads kicked in. Then on the road at the Porter Larson Memorial at Wyoming. Are you still planning on taking that road trip to Laramie to see the Wyoming game?
Absolutely. I'll be there.
God bless you. At least it's early September, so you won't be freezing, and hopefully
Maybe.
no Wyoming fans throw human feces at you. That's a real thing that happens up there.
I know it has happened. Hopefully,
It happens
hopefully
consistently.
avoid that.
But with the Utes, I think probably after the Texas Tech game here in Salt Lake, then on the road to West Virginia, after those 4 or 5 games are behind us, then we'll have a better idea of exactly what sort of hand that we've been dealt. Because after that, you run into a bit of a gauntlet. Arizona State, the highest-ranked Big 12 team here in Salt Lake, on the road in Provo at BYU, which is always tricky. And then you go to Boulder to see Dion and the Colorado Buffs, who really aren't getting near the amount of preseason buzz this year than they were last year. Obviously, Shador and Travis Hunter are in the NFL. So that's something that will, change the scope of the attention. And BYU's non-con isn't great. The Portland State is the opener. I think if you're a BYU fan, you don't mind a soft landing spot to open things off because you are going to be breaking in a new quarterback. And regardless of the hype around any of the 3 that we'll discuss today, as far as BYU's decision-making process goes, anytime you do something for the first time, you're simply going to struggle. It doesn't necessarily happen quite often where either a transfer true freshman who has never played at this level simply hits the ground running. You got to get your feet wet. So for BYU, their conference schedule begins at Colorado after their East Carolina road trip. Then they get West Virginia at home. Then they're at Arizona before hosting Utah. So preseason polls are preseason polls. That's all it is. It gives you some conversation and some fodder, topically some things to discuss. I will be interested to see where both these 2 teams come in with the AP poll and then the rest of the Big 12 as well. Because the Big 12 is not getting a ton of love as far as the preseason stuff. Arizona State, your highest-ranked team at 11. Then you have to go all the way down to K-State at 20, Iowa State 21, BYU 23, Texas Tech 24. And then teams receiving votes, it's Utah, Baylor, in that in that area. So we'll see. Once conference play begins, once the non-con is behind us, we'll kind of have a better idea of exactly what sort of situation is in front of us. If you missed the breaking news, the minivan is on its way back to Salt Lake. George Niang has been traded to the Utah Jazz by the Boston Celtics, along with 2 second-round draft picks. So we have some NBA content to get to today. We'll do that with Smitty a little bit later on, but we'll catch our first break and continue the college football conversation coming up on the other side with our friend Kyle Bonagura on a Tuesday edition of The Drive. And it's good to have you along for the ride right here on ESPN 700. Going to bring in our buddy Spencer Linton today from BYU TV. Latest on the quarterback battle down in Provo. Another big-time basketball commit as well. Dave Bartu, College Football Matrix. Richard Smith will join us. The Jazz have made a trade. The minivan is on his way back to Salt Lake City. George Niang will be playing for the Jazz next year. The Jazz traded R.J. Lewis and received Niang and 2 second-round picks as well. So that news became official. Start things off on a Tuesday afternoon with one of my favorite guests, now a podcaster, Kyle Bonagura. Kyle, happy Tuesday, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great, Spence. How are you?
I'm well. So let's start with your new project. And I recall hearing about this, but now as a result of, I read the entire piece that you and Adam did this morning when I saw you were going to be on. I pulled this up. So Paul Wolf's mother, of course, Paul was the head coach of Washington State for a number of years. Dolores Wolf disappeared in July of 1979. And it is quite a fascinating story that I'm not sure how many people are fully aware of. So let's go back to the origin story, kind of when you heard about this and then why you and Adam decided to do this entire project.
Yeah, no, thanks for willing to chat about it. We're really excited about the project. So, I think the most obvious place to start, just for your listeners, is that Paul Wolf is now the head coach at Cal Poly, who Utah will host in its first home game this year. So a little bit of a Utah Utes connection right from the jump here. So in 2020, Adam and I were kind of going through the COVID motions, right, trying to report about college football during that weird season. And he received a tip that he saw this interesting story about Paul Wolf, and it's something about his mother. And so he was like, "Hey, this is kind of interesting. We should look into this." And so the short version is that when Paul Wolf was 12 years old, he's the youngest of 4 children. One night, his mother disappeared, never was seen or heard from again. Almost immediately, his father was telling both him and his other brother, who were still living at the house, that she was gone and she was never coming back. It emerged very quickly that he was the primary suspect in her disappearance, but through a number of factors, they weren't able to ever prosecute him. He was never, never went before a jury to face any charges. But it really impacted the trajectory of his life, of course, right? He moves out of his house with his dad. He effectively lost both parents when this happens, is raised by his aunt and uncle, a really fascinating uncle who's had a crazy military career that we get into as well. And then 41 years later, in the summer of 2020, a cold case detective in the Bay Area near where I live, was kind of tipped off about another case and went down this rabbit hole and eventually determined that Paul Wolf's mother had been found just 6 weeks after she went missing, but no one was able to identify her. She had been in the cemetery one county over for 4 decades, and they were able to do DNA testing through Paul to make the determination that this woman who had only been identified in an unmarked grave as Jane Doe 16 was in fact his mother. It's a crazy story. We wrote about it in 2020 or 2021 for ESPN, where we kind of outlined the whole process, and there was a lot of just wild stuff that happened. There's just too much to get into, but it was the most incredible story that Adam and I had ever worked on. And so we published the story. It was very much through the lens of Paul and this coach. It is an ESPN story, but there was so much more to it that we couldn't get into in our story. It was a story that we both felt deeply deserved to be told more broadly to a wider audience, just in terms of not sports fans specifically. And so ESPN, with its blessing, allowed us to pursue the project kind of on the side as a podcast. And so over the past year or so, a little bit more than a year, we've been kind of working on it in our free time. And the first episode of the podcast was released yesterday. It's called The Unforgotten. It's season 3 of a pre-existing podcast, and the season is called Finding Dolores Wolf.
Yeah, it's a gripping story. I mean, the written portion that I read starts out with Paul as a young man, and the way you framed it was great because it was just one of those things that grips you to the point where you want to read the entire thing. In March of '85, Paul, who was 18, had been summoned to a meeting to confront the suspect in his mother's murder, and then you revealed that the suspect is his father. And I can't imagine what that's like when you're 18 years old and you're asked to sit across your father to try to dig for information to find out whether or not he's the one that actually is responsible for the mother's disappearance. I mean, it is written through the lens of Paul, and excited to listen to the pod. But how would you say all of this kind of shaped him and, through the lens of what he became, which is a high-level player in college, then, of course, a coach?
I think it's foundational in who he became as a person, right? You can't live through something as traumatic as that and not having it impact you like to your core, right? And I think it started, and I talked a lot about this with Paul over the years. He moved in with his uncle and aunt, who I mentioned earlier, this guy who was a Vietnam vet, a really interesting guy, who we have a whole episode devoted to. Like, his military career is just crazy. That's episode 4, so look forward to that. But he was a guy who was very involved in the community as a coach, like coached Little League Baseball, youth softball, was involved in slow pitch softball, recreationally, like just like coached all his kids in all their sports. Was, he estimated that he coached maybe 5,000 kids over the course of his life in this community, and being raised by someone like that after the separation of his immediate family. The guy kind of stepped in as his protector at a time when he really needed it, right? Those are foundational years for anyone, right? But for someone who's 12 and goes through what he went through, now this is the mentor figure. He treated Paul like a son, and was a better father than his actual father had ever been. And so I think he gravitated towards coaching and being around a team and having that camaraderie. And then I think what kind of stands out to me after talking with Paul about it is like, look, he feels like he can really relate to a lot of what these kids are going through and have the perspective of, like, football is very important, right? That's why they're all there. It's a big part of everyone's life who's involved in these high level teams, but there's other stuff going on in everyone's life, and it's tough at times, right? And so he's very sympathetic to family struggles and outside of, like, whatever someone is dealing with, and being kind of accepting of them and being able to kind of relate to them in those ways. And so I think all of those elements that he went through, like he like formed him and allowed him to kind of have those deeply personal relationships with all of his players and coaches.
So one of the, several interesting portions of this, but the connection about his mother's body having been found was made by a lady named Stacy Sherman, who was looking for additional victims of the Golden State Killer, a man named Joseph James D'Angelo, who was arrested in 2018 on 8 counts of murder. Were there ever any other suspects outside of Carl, Paul's father, or did this appear to be, okay, this is just one person and we just don't have enough evidence to pin him down?
Yeah, it was very clear to anyone who was around then, and we did extensive interviews with the investigator at the time, the district attorney at the time, lots of family members, like many hours, like kind of looking into that possibility, and like everyone knew, the community knew, the family knew, the police knew, the district attorney knew, everyone knew who did it. But at that time, it was just getting a murder conviction without a body was almost impossible at that point in time. Like, there was physical evidence tied to it. There was blood on a blanket. There was, like, her missing earring was found in the trunk. There was, like, enough there. But the DA, and we discussed this with him fairly recently, like, it was a lot of circumstantial stuff. And so they made the decision at a certain point to, like, well, all right, let's keep looking for the body, and hopefully we find it. And then once we have the body, it's a slam dunk. But without it, we think he'll probably walk. And so what actually happens is 6 years go by with no arrest. And so finally the family is fed up. And so they push the envelope a little bit and take the case to the Attorney General in the state of California, who looks at the evidence, is like, yeah, there's enough here to pursue a murder charge. We'll go ahead and handle it if the local DA doesn't want to. And so at that point, Yolo County, which is in Northern California, outside of Sacramento, it says, okay, they didn't want to be big-footed by the Attorney General's office, and kind of relents and says, okay, we'll prosecute the case. So the father is eventually arrested, and there's weeks of evidentiary hearings in front of a judge to determine if the case could go to trial. And what the judge ruled is that because they took 6 years to charge him with murder, they violated his right to a speedy trial, and therefore the case could not proceed. So it wasn't anything about the evidence. It wasn't anything about he wasn't proved innocent. It was really just a technicality that let him walk. And that's why he never faced justice.
One portion also alludes to the fact that Carl, Paul's father, tried to come back into his life later on when Paul was a college football player and a coach. Did that connection ever manifest anything lasting? Was Paul ever open to trying to have a relationship with his father when he tried to come back into his life?
No, so like the last time they ever met or they ever spoke in person was in I believe 1988. And so Paul is a player at Washington State, and it might be in the years wrong, but the story is the same. Like they had played UCLA. UCLA was the number one team in the country at the time. Washington State was a middle of the road team. Went to the Rose Bowl and beat UCLA, upset the number one team in the country. Big deal, right? Obviously for Paul, for the team, all of that. And outside the locker room after the game, his dad was there. He had come to the game. He wanted to see him. And so Paul, gave him a couple minutes and said, "Hey, it's probably not a good idea for you to be here." A lot of his, friends and family were there, and he was persona non grata around the family. He was like, basically, you need to leave. And he's like, "Well, I want to have more to do with you in your life." And Paul's like, "Look, until you tell me more about what happened to my mother, we're not going to have a relationship." And that was the last time they ever saw each other in person. There was one more phone call the following spring between Paul and his father about, hey, like kind of one last chance to try to salvage the relationship from his father's perspective, but they never talked again after that. So it was the last several decades of the man's life, and Paul had no contact with him.
You referenced the uncle who does manifest himself throughout the written portion of what I've read here as a very, very interesting guy. Slick was his nickname. And, he and others were pretty hell-bent on making sure that Carl did not enjoy his existence at all, even while he was a free man. Can you elaborate on some of the things that they did to him to just try to? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is some of my favorite part of the story. And we've got a couple episodes devoted to this stuff. So episode 3 will be basically all the stuff they did to drive this man crazy and drive him out of town. And the 4th episode is basically we profile Slick, and he's just incredible. We spent some time with him at his apartment. He was telling us a lot of wild stories. But so anyways, they're basically the family. The Dolores had a large Portuguese family who all lived in the community. Carl had no family in the area, so he was surrounded by her family in this small town outside Sacramento. And after she went missing, they made his life a living hell. I mean, they would cut off his power. They would write like murder on his garage door and animal blood. They would throw dead animal carcasses on his lawn of his property. They would chase him out of grocery stores. They would stalk him around town. At one point, there was a jar of urine that they threw through his living room window into his house. I mean, they really pushed the envelope, stopping short of physical violence. Certainly, a lot of it would have, been illegal in its own right, or what they were doing, just intimidating this man. But again, like, everyone knew he was responsible for her disappearance and likely her murder at that time. So the police in town basically looked the other way and let them kind of have their way with this guy because, they felt, like the police in this small town felt like this guy should face justice. And if this is all they're going to be able to do, then they were kind of happy to look the other way. And then this guy Slick, the uncle, Dolores's brother, who they had a really tight relationship, and we get into that in the pod. He was someone who, before the Vietnam War had really broken out into a full-scale war, was in the 101st Airborne Division of the Army and had been, parachuting in under the cover of darkness, assassinating enemy leaders before the war had broken out. He was killing people with his bare hands. This is, I guess, maybe a little violent disclaimer here, but there was like a lot of stuff that was really graphic that he described with us, and we get into that on the pod. So here's a guy who was responsible for a lot of death on his own as a member of the military, and he did all of this like he was conditioned to believe it's in service of the country, right? You can understand this is the 50s, right? That's like what he was assigned to do, right? And so he executed the task that he was told to do, but it still took a real toll on him. And what he told us is that, or he told his son, is that he would have to work himself into a frenzy to be able to do these acts for the military. He told him that he had to pretend like these people were harming his sister, and then he would get into a state of mind where he's able to kind of act in the way that they asked him to. And then he gets back to the United States after going through all of this, and then his sister really is taken from his life. He knows who's responsible for doing it, and had to show some restraint. And it was tough because he told us, and this is all laid out in the interviews, like he thought about exacting revenge on him. Told a few graphic stories about plans they had to to torture Carl Wolf and get some answers out of him. He decided ultimately not to go through with that because he made the choice to raise Paul Wolf and his brother. It was a real kind of inflection point in all of their lives. But it was like morally, he felt like he was kind of sealed. He was a religious guy, and like kind of what's done is done. What's one more? It won't affect me, ultimately, right? Is kind of where his mindset was. So really fascinating characters, a lot of really good storytellers throughout the family. And I think that's the podcast medium was really the perfect way to execute this story.
Last thing on this, Kyle, then we'll do a couple of other things before I set you loose. As if losing your mother allegedly at the hands of your father as a young man wasn't enough of a tragedy to handle throughout one's life, Paul Wolf was handed another very, very tough blow as his wife, Tammy, in 1997 was diagnosed with a brain tumor and was given 3 to 5 years to live, and she later on passed in March of 2002. I always find it interesting when you hear stories behind people that you only know of as like a coach or a player or someone with some sort of notoriety. I mean, I don't know that I really have a question, but this is just another piece of the Paul Wolf puzzle that I think deserves to be talked about,
He's really I think because he had such a high profile stint at Washington State that did not go well, right? They had the record, his record there was not good. It was historically bad, in fact. But I think he was so hardened by these things that he had gone through in his life that just the fact that he was able to become a head coach at Eastern Washington, it was the head coach at his alma mater, where he tried to clean up a mess. I mean, he certainly had the program in much better shape to hand off to Mike Leach than when he inherited it from Bill Doba. It was just kind of in shambles when he got there. They didn't really have a chance. But I think a lot of people just formulated their opinion based on those years and the win-loss, right? And you didn't hear about what this guy had gone through getting to that point, right? And so I gained a ton of respect for Paul over the last several years, getting to know him and learning about him and his family and kind of everything they went through and how they banded together. The story is really it's a true crime story. It's a search for a missing woman, but I've been telling people it's a story about a family and this family bond that was unbreakable in many ways. Just the ties that they have that lasted over several decades, all unified behind this single cause is really impressive. And then for Paul to progress through all of that and be very successful, the wins weren't there at Washington State, but he progressed through. He was on Harbaugh's stuff with the Niners when they went to the Super Bowl. He bounced around in college, and now he's back in the head chair at Cal Poly, trying to resurrect that program as a head coach once again. So I'm glad he's got another opportunity to try to make the best of a cool situation down there at Cal Poly.
It's the best way for people to find the pod, Kyle.
Yeah, so it's just called The Unforgotten, Season 3, Finding Dolores Wolf. It's anywhere, it's on all podcast platforms, so anyone who's into the podcast scene should have no trouble finding it. I've tweeted a little bit about it, kind of broke out of my Twitter hibernation to promote it a bit. So if they just want to find me on Twitter, you can easily navigate. But yeah, The Unforgotten, Finding Dolores Wolf. Any Googling, any searching should be pretty easy to find.
There you go. All right. Let's move over to the coaches poll that was released yesterday. My question is, how much stock should anybody put into this? How serious of an endeavor is this for any college football coach?
Yeah, deeply unserious. If you're if there's 25 teams ranked, or I forget how many actually voting members there are, how many actual coaches voted, the percentage is very low. It's a lot of SIDs, staffers, assistants, those sorts, putting it together. And a lot of them are just looking at way too early lists and using that as a starting point, making a couple adjustments just so it's not the same, right? This is these people do not take this seriously. But that being said, I love this stuff. I love seeing where it starts. I think it's just part of the tradition of college football. All right, let's see where everyone is, and no, it's at the end of the year, and it's nowhere near, right? It's always going to be a lot different. And I think in this era too, it's so much harder to predict. College football's always been hard to kind of project what a top 25, but now with all the transfer stuff, no one knows anything. No one's ever known anything, but now it's really throwing. You're blindfolded throwing darts here, but it's a good talking piece and sets expectations and storylines. So always kind of evolve from where those rankings are at the beginning of the year.
A few years ago, because the conversation that you and I are having on air now often, kind of transpires where talking heads wonder whether or not any coach actually takes this endeavor seriously, or if they even fill out their poll. So I texted an in-state coach a few years ago, and I told him it would be off the record, so I've never brought his name on air. And I said, have you ever done this before? And if so, how serious do you take it? He said, I haven't done it once. Have you had any conversations with coaches about that dynamic, whether or not they even do the thing?
Yeah, so I have, and so I talked to David Shaw when he was at Stanford. I was around them quite a bit in his early years. He actually did fill it out for 1 year, and he's like, I felt like, if it's called the coaches poll, he felt like he had an obligation to do it himself. But then he did it for 1 year and realized like what an exercise in futility it was, and so he stopped participating. Stanford stopped participating after his one season. He's like, look, if it's called the coaches poll, it should be the coaches. But now that I've done it, I realize I don't have time for this to do it, spend the time to really do it correctly. So we're just not going to participate. He's the only one I've ever talked to who admitted to actually doing it themselves. Like no one else I've ever talked to has been upfront and said, I do it each week up and down. I think some of the coaches probably have like, who do you want to be number one? Who's your top five? And then they have their staffer, whoever it is, fill out the rest. There's like I think that involvement is like somewhat common, but certainly not all the way through.
So the main takeaway here locally is that Jake Retzlaff departs for Tulane, yet BYU still cracks that top 25. They come in at number 23. We still don't know who's going to start under center. McKay Hillstead, Trayson Bourget, and Bear Bachmeyer, the three battling. So my two-part question is your thoughts on BYU actually cracking the top 25, and if Jake stays, where do you think they land?
Yeah, that's a good. So I think like the fact that they're in the top 25, I think it's probably a lot of this is so based on what you did last year, independent of like what your roster looks like, right? So like, I think because they won 11 games last year, you're always going to get a shot to start in the top 25, regardless of what happened with Retzlaff. Obviously, they ended up at 23. With him, they're probably top 15, I would imagine, and some people punished for not having a returning quarterback, of course. Is it fair? Yeah, like I have it actually pulled up right now. I kind of thought Texas Tech would be a little higher. Like I'm actually surprised that BYU, and I didn't see where the Big 12 preseason predictions were, but like with all the money that Texas Tech invested in its program, I kind of thought they would be a little higher. Now that I'm looking at it now, but again, like it's just there's no rhyme or reason to why, especially when you get out of the top 10 in particular. Then people are, I think they try to do it well at the top, and then the lower you get in the process, it's like you can't really differentiate between these teams. So anywhere from like, I don't know, 13 to 25, all those teams you could probably just throw into a hat and pick out randomly, and it probably ended up looking pretty similar.
And just because we're the home of the Utes and they're a mile away, I'll ask you about Utah technically coming in at 30 with others receiving votes, and whether or not you think the AP poll next week will kind of reflect a similar area for the Utes.
Yeah, I think so. They'll get votes, and I think the defense was so good last year, right? And the quarterback play, I mean, you guys and your listeners know more than I do, but like you bring in the defense was not an issue; it won't be an issue again this year. You bring in a quarterback who had worked with his offensive coordinator, had success. It's a proven formula to resurrect teams, right? To have that sort of camaraderie, and now that you have a player who's proven he can run an offense and run this exact offense. In theory, it solves the problem, right? And so you have this elite defense. Even if you were like somewhat competent on offense for Utah, like the team would have had a lot more wins last year. And so that simple, very rudimentary combination like makes me optimistic that they can be a lot more successful this year. And I think kind of showing up at 30 or whatever kind of reflects that same sort of logic.
According to both this coach's poll and then pretty much everything else, including Bill Conley's rankings for you guys over at ESPN, it does feel like Arizona State is the prohibitive favorite, and there's a bit of a gap between them and everybody else. To your point, we look at what you did a year ago, and we know what ASU did a year ago. 79% of their production is returning, including Sam Levitt. Does it feel like they are the deserved favorite in the Big 12 this year?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like losing Scottaboo is tough, right? Because he was so much of what they did as a rusher, even as a pass catcher. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying about Retzlaff. Like if you have a good team and your starting quarterback is coming back, that's just like people are just going to think expectations are going to be high, and that's the case with ASU. Levitt's coming back; he had a good year. I think the expectation is it'll be better. He'll be better this year, and even relied on more without Scottaboo around to carry the ball. Their backup running back, whose name is escaping me offhand, was a pretty good player last year, kind of in relief of Scottaboo. So he's someone they feel like can kind of step in and have a really productive year as well. But yeah, I think like it's earned, right, after the year they had and the good showing in the playoffs. I mean, they probably should have beat Texas. They probably felt they should have beat Texas, I guess. So the fact that it was a coin flip game against a team with a ton of talent, shows that ASU is for real. And I just think that, the coaching turnaround there has been as impressive as any in college football. And you have so much of college football is the coaching staff, right? That coaching matters in football more than any other sport. And so I think they're operating from a place of strength there as well.
As I always say, I will not ask you about the depth of Real Salt Lake and whether or not their third left back is something you think can lift them into the playoffs. But Kyle, since you and I spoke, Diego Luna had himself a nice little Gold Cup run. He's been back on the ground here for a little bit, and he is by far their best, most productive player. They did bring in a couple of summer additions, one DP, a 9, and then what their manager calls a 9.5. But do you think Diego Luna has done enough to solidify a spot for next year's World Cup?
I wouldn't say it's not fully set in stone yet. I expect him to be on the team, and I'm almost ready to think that he has a chance to play. Like he hasn't. I don't think he's proven to be in that spot yet, but I think that's in play. And the fact that he's come so far so quickly, that's fascinating, right? It was just a few years ago that, I don't know how many, maybe 4 years ago now, that San Jose didn't even he was an academy player and they dropped him from the academy. He goes the USL route, latches up with the RSL is really taken off. And the fact that that we can even have this discussion about whether he's going to be on the team, whether he's going to contribute, what his role should be. I mean, that sort of trajectory is so rare in American soccer to jump so quickly through USL, through an MLS team, and to be in contention for a roster spot when there's so many other guys at his position are playing at big clubs in Europe, right? I think, RSL fans should enjoy him for as long as they can, because I think he's got a future that's going to take him to places with much brighter spotlights.
One more soccer question for you. I wonder, and I've drawn the parallel on the show between, rest in peace, Grant Wall, the Beckham experiment, the David Beckham MLS partnership that has continued into his foray into ownership of the Miami club. And Grant wrote a great book called The Beckham Experiment that I read that I thought was awesome. And then the parallel between David Beckham and what Lionel Messi has brought to the league. Now, I always hesitate to do it because then you get soccer people. I know that Messi is 20 times the player that Beckham was. I understand that. And maybe when you're that good, you don't necessarily have to be the type of statesman that Beckham was for MLS. I mean, Beckham came here multiple times. And Kyle, he stayed after matches for hours and signed autographs. Like, he got it. He understood what the deal was. He understood that he wasn't the player that he was once upon a time with Man U or the English national team. And so he was here more of like a rep for the game and a rep for the league, and he just could not have been better. And maybe it's just because Messi is Messi. He doesn't have to do those things, but doesn't show up to the All-Star game. They suspend him, which felt a little bit wild. But do you think MLS is getting the ROI, and you can define that in any way, shape, or form, with this Messi experiment that they've undertaken over the past couple of years?
Yeah, so that's really interesting because it's been massive, undoubtedly. Like, the exposure that the league has gotten as a result of having Messi in the league is significant. And now, how does it meet the other side? Is now it doesn't meet expectations. Whatever Messi does, and it'll probably be the same for the rest of his life. Like, he goes on vacation in his 70s, he'll still draw a crowd. Right? He's that type of just talent and just personality. Just that people just gravitate to him, and he's like a god for people in Argentina and really around the world. So I think it's been it's been incredible for the league. But I also don't think the league has done enough to maximize him at the same time, if that makes sense. So it's kind of two-pronged at least. It's been huge. The league has certainly benefited. Like, a lot of the people who bought Apple Plus subscriptions just to watch Messi, it's probably hard to calculate. I mean, there's a reason that was part of the deal for him, right? He gets a cut of subscriptions to the league just for internationally, just because they're not buying the subscriptions to watch MLS. They're buying subscriptions to watch Lionel Messi play soccer wherever he's going to be. So I think ultimately what we'll find out is long term. Like, when he's gone, what does the league look like, and how will his time in the league have pushed it forward? It comes at an interesting time with the World Cup coming, and that's also going to have an impact. But I thought there was a really strong wave of Messi storylines and just involvement when he came over, but I really feel like it's tapered off, quite a bit this year. There's the Club World Cup where he participated, which I think was a nice boom to kind of have him. They advanced to the group, they were the only MLS club to do that. But then you get to PSG and you see there's levels to this. So yeah, it's an interesting, again, like I just think after the fact, what will attendance look like in Miami when Messi is gone, right? We'll find out, because it's not, there are not very many Inter Miami fans. There are Messi fans who are going to support him wherever. And so we'll find out. It's hard to calibrate right now, I think.
Last thing, I'll set you loose. Less than a year away from the World Cup. What's the Kyle Bonagura confidence level in our team, whatever that means to you? I mean, get out of group, whatever. Something that could be somewhat exciting for the World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to get out of the group, or it's a massive failure, especially with an expanded World Cup, right? So you go from 32 teams to 48 teams. That inherently is going to dilute the competition, and so it should be easier to get out of the group because there's less good teams. And you got out of the group last time in a tough group, and you have no one who's really aged out, right? So you should have essentially the same team, but guys who are like further deep into their prime. You have a coach who is, on paper better, right? He's certainly a bigger name and has achieved more at a higher level of the sport. But that hasn't shown up, over the last 2 years. Obviously, Berhalter was with them during Copa, and that they crashed out early. The Gold Cup, you have a small complement of the full team in the tournament at all, you can't really evaluate the team and how they've done. You're not going to have the qualification process. I feel like interest in the U.S. national team is really down right now just because of all those factors. So, yeah, I mean, if you don't advance, it's an abject disaster. And you probably, because there's an extra, I believe there's an extra round of the knockout phase too. So you probably need to win a knockout game as well to really be defined as a success. But I think if you had asked me about expectations about this team after the last World Cup, I would say, look, you got to make it to the quarterfinals. But now, there just hasn't been a lot of positive developments for the team recently to have those same sort of expectations.
Kyle, thanks, man, for the time. Excellent work on the story and the pod. We'll make sure to send it out on our socials. Have a great week, and we'll chat soon.
All right, thanks, friends.
Kyle Bonagura. ESPN covers college football and soccer. This new podcast that he has with Adam Rittenberg is about the disappearance of Paul Wolf's mother. And I read the written description of the disappearance of Dolores Wolf. I have not listened to the pod yet, but the story is gripping. And it is something that is definitely worth your time. At Bonagura ESPN, that's his social channel. You can find the link to all of his work up there. Like any good coach, it's time to update the game plan for a healthy green lawn. As the hot weather continues this month, make sure you're using IFA's Step 3 Summer Lawn Food for healthy turf that stays green in every season. IFA Step 3 Lawn Food, it's the ultimate lawn owner power move with our good friends over at IFA. All right, we got 1 hour in the books. We've got 3 hours to go. Spencer Linton, our friend from BYU TV, will stop by. We got Dave Bartu, the college football matrix. Richard Smith joins us to break down the massive blockbuster trade. George Niang is coming home. The minivan back in Salt Lake. RJ Luis goes to Boston. George Niang and 2 second-round picks come to the Utah Jazz. So a little unexpected NBA news on a Tuesday. We'll break it down later on, so keep it right here on ESPN 700. I'm going to bring in Spencer Linton from BYU TV for the latest on the quarterback battle down south. We'll do some big picture, Big 12 stuff with Spencer today. The USA Today coaches poll was released yesterday. BYU comes in at 23. Utah, others receiving votes. Technically the 30th ranked team in that poll. Interested to see what the AP poll manifests coming up next Monday. Of course, the question marks at quarterback for BYU did not necessarily dissuade voters from voting them into the top 25. Interesting conversation about what it would look like if Jake Retzlaff was under center, but he's not. The quarterback battle is down to 3 players. McKay Hillstead, who has 8 starts under his belt up at Utah State, I believe is a freshman. Trayson Bourget, a couple years of Western Michigan. And then the true freshman, Bear Bachmeier, who played his spring ball at Stanford, who has the measurables that the other two don't. He's like 6'2", 6'3", 215, 220. During their spring experience and now in fall camp, he's worn number 47, which is an odd number for a quarterback. I believe Bear was a running back in high school. Maybe that's where the number comes from. So bring in Spencer today. Dave Bartu, College Football Matrix, one of our favorite guests to get weird with on a Tuesday. And then Richard Smith will join us, 40 years with the Jazz front office. The Jazz made a trade today. The Jazz sent R.J. Luis to the Boston Celtics in exchange for George Niang. The minivan is coming back to Salt Lake. George's salary will go into the slot that was created by the John Collins trade. The Jazz had a trade exception, and they had a couple of second-rounders to their treasure trove of draft assets as well. The motivation for Boston, this is kind of a gap year for them, a pivot year for them. So they now, I believe, are under the second apron entirely after moving on from Porzingis and others. They've kind of jettisoned everybody while Jason Tatum continues to recover from that Achilles. This will be just kind of a weird year in Boston where they're not going to win a lot of games. They're probably going to maybe compete for a play-in spot, but ultimately, if you're an owner of an NBA team, and the Celtics were sold last year, you're probably not interested in writing an extra $500 million check for a team that's not going to be serious about competing. That's where the Phoenix Suns found themselves last year. So a little unexpected NBA news that we'll get with Smitty with coming up in a bit. If you missed the Kyle Bonagura interview, I would encourage you to go to his socials and check out this new project that he and Adam Rittenberg, friend of the show, have undertaken about the disappearance of Paul Wolf's mother. Paul was the coach at Washington State for a number of years. Didn't go well for Paul as a coach up there. I think he was 9-40, if I remember correctly, which, just do a little quick math, yeah, it's not good. But his mother disappeared from their home in 1979, and there was no body, there was no answers. And then 4 decades later, the information came to light about what had happened there. And ultimately, the lone suspect was Paul's father, Carl. Carl passed away at the age of 70. He was charged at one point, but they didn't have enough evidence to kind of keep him locked up and then go forward with the charges. So he was released and then lived his life. But one of the most interesting parts is the family dynamic surrounding Paul after Paul lost essentially both parents at a very young age. So good stuff there. Kyle's socials at Bonagura ESPN is where you find him. And then, of course, we talked a little Big 12 football, and will Diego Luna play for the U.S. men's national team? But there's a quarterback race about 40 miles down south, and nobody better to break it down than our good buddy Spencer Linton from BYU TV. Spencer, happy Tuesday, sir. How are you?
Good, Spence. Great to talk with you, man. And what's this you mentioned of a quarterback battle? I didn't know something was happening there.
Oh, am I breaking news for you? I mean, look, if the BYU media members need breaking news on the home of the Utes about BYU, Spencer, we've got something to talk about, buddy.
Oh yeah, we're in trouble. We're in trouble. Yeah, clearly, Spence. That is all anybody really wants to talk about when it comes to BYU football at this juncture is who's going to be the starter. You know, whether I'm at church or I'm in the grocery store or I'm walking to my car, like I can see it, I can spot it from a mile away. Someone sees me, they make eye contact, and almost 80% of the time, I guarantee there's going to be a question about who's going to be the starting quarterback at BYU football, but it comes with the territory, and clearly that has been the headliner to open up training camp for Kalani Sitake.
The main difference between you and I, Spencer, even though we have similar names, is when you walk into church, they say, who's the quarterback? When I walk into church, they say, what the hell are you doing here?
with open arms, my friend.
Oh, for sure.
And ever.
No, for sure. Speaking of which, do you know anybody named Spencer under the age of like 35? I feel like for about 10 years, if you were raised in an LDS household, there was a good chance your name was Spencer. And now I don't think anybody will ever be named Spencer again.
Oh, that's a great point. No, I mean, my oldest son has my name as his middle name, but yeah, I now that you ask that, I do not think I know anybody, at least not in my close circle, that I could recall off the top of my head that shares my name. That is wild, man. We need more love for the name Spencer moving forward.
And honestly, I believe we're close to the same age. Again, I know dozens of Spencers in LDS families that are around our age, but I think after a while, people are like, yeah, the name's not all that great. We're going to move on.
It's washed up.
It is.
It ran its course. It's good.
It is. But indeed, we traverse on. All right. Well, I know you're sick of talking about it, but it is the one thing people want to know. So McKay Hillstead, 8 starts under his belt at Utah State, the Trayson Bourget kid that spent a couple of years at Western Michigan, and then Bear Bachmeier, who I feel like a lot of people are really, really high on. How would you handicap this as of now, and how do you think it's going to play out?
Yeah, it is really splitting hairs at this juncture. And Aaron Roderick, the offensive coordinator, said late last week, it's going to be a minute. It's going to take some time. And I know that others have been outspoken. Brandon Doman, a former BYU quarterback, is like, no, you have to make the decision now. You got to make your decision and go with it. The earlier, the better. It's going to be more advantageous to your team. But I believe, based on commentary from Aaron Roderick and Fesi Satake and other coaches on the current staff, that they need at least 10 practices to really be able to, and it might be more practices than that, to even get to a point where they're like, all right, now this guy is creating some separation. BYU's not in a situation right now where they can be like, okay, all we needed was a week. He's the guy. No, we're not there. And so I don't think that they will know, even within the staff, that their starting quarterback is this guy until at least, I don't know, throwing out a date, like August 20th. Like, we probably need 2 more weeks and 8 to 10 more practices before they can feel confident in seeing separation for a guy. Now, if you were to ask me, and you did in a roundabout way, like, who's the guy today and how are we handicapping them now, I would give a very slight edge to McKay Hillstead, because I feel like his skill set naturally fits Aaron Roderick's offense best right now. And I think that he's the guy that's hitting all of A-Rod's love languages at this point. And for those who are wondering what the heck I'm talking about, A-Rod pays attention to 3 things very closely. 1, red zone efficiency. 2, taking care of the ball. And 3, your ability to scramble and extend plays and make something happen when the pocket does eventually collapse. And I think Hillstead is the guy that is at least consistently doing those things the best right now. But it's, a very slim margin between McKay and Trayson Bourget and Bear Bachmeier. If I were making the depth chart today, I'd probably have McKay starting, Trayson very close second behind. And Bear is intriguing because he's a guy that you could implement some specialty packages for with what he brings to the field. And I know that people hate the idea of, multiple quarterbacks. Like, I'm not saying BYU needs to play multiple quarterbacks, but don't be surprised to see BYU in the red zone on the 10-yard line, and all of a sudden Bear Bachmeier comes in and the defense is like, okay, here's this kid wearing number 47. He's a big physical guy. We know he likes to run, but you do have to respect his ability to pass. It's almost like what BYU did with Taysom Hill in 2012. And frankly, what the Saints are doing with Taysom Hill right now. It's like, okay, well, we can't be sure that he's going to run. We think he's going to run, but he might throw. It might be a play action element. So that's kind of how I would sum it up right now is McKay's the guy, very close race between he and Trayson, who would be number 2, and then some specialty packages for Bear Bachmeier, who once he's in the system a little bit longer, because he's been impressive thus far, just give him a little more time to acclimate in, and he's got the highest ceiling. But just he's 3rd right now, but don't be surprised to see him on the field in some unique twists in A-Rod's offense.
You referenced the number, and as I was watching some film, I'm like, can we get our guy a different number than 47 if he's playing quarterback? Like, it's just a little bit odd. Like, what's the origin story of Bear Bachmeier, who is trying to be a quarterback at BYU wearing number 47?
He likes the idea of just being different and almost like a linebacker's mentality where he's just a football player. So we need to dive into that some more. But from what I've gathered, it's just kind of, I like it because it's different. And I feel like I bring a physical nature to the game. And so 47 it is. It's just something that he made a decision about a while ago, and it kind of made its way in through the prep ranks and what he was doing there. And it kind of identifies himself as just different. So I'll have to get into the specifics of the 47 with him and kind of dive like, why that number specifically? Why not number 45 or number 42? So let me follow up on that. That is a loaded question and one that is certainly worthy of being asked.
So the coaches poll is released on Monday, and we just had Kyle Bonagura on the show. And I asked Kyle throughout his entire career covering college football how many coaches he's spoken to that admitted they actually did this. And he said one. It was David Shaw, who said he did it 1 year and never did it again. About three years ago, I texted a coach in state, and I said, off the record, how many times have you done this exercise? He said 0. Not one time. I've never done it. I always delegate. It's an exercise in futility. However, it's early August, and we're inching closer and closer to games, so it is topical. Were you surprised that despite breaking in a new quarterback, BYU still broke the top 25 coming in at number 23?
Absolutely. I did not expect BYU to be in any top 25, whether it be notable preseason magazines like Phil Steele and Lindy's and Athlon. Certainly not after the Jake Retzlaff news broke that he was leaving. It's like, okay, now BYU is not in that top 25 category. I think the closest I've seen BYU, other than the coaches poll you're referencing now, was something that came out from CBS Sports yesterday, or maybe this morning, which was they ranked all 136 FBS teams, and BYU was at number 36, which I thought was a fair number. Because I do believe that they're a good team, and there's a lot of faith and trust in Kalani and the culture that he's built. But everyone's in a holding pattern, understandably, because of the quarterback situation. So when I saw the coaches poll at number 23, I thought, whoa. Okay, the sports information directors, you were talking about, clearly did not get the memo about what's happening with BYU's offense right now, because you're right. It's whatever person in the athletic department has been delegated the responsibility to submit said ballot for the coaches poll, and it all gets tabulated. And I'm sure that some of them are like, well, BYU beat up on Colorado in the Alamo Bowl and went 11-2 and finished number 13. Yeah, I'll throw them in the top 25. So probably some lazy research there, or just like, hey, let's just get it done. When the media poll and the AP side comes out, I believe on Monday, I don't think we're going to see BYU in the top 25. I think there will be a few that might put them at the very back of the poll, so they'll be receiving votes in some small capacity. But I think they probably deserve to be somewhere between 8 to 12 spots out of the top 25, because 23 straight up shocked me. And I think BYU, they revel in the idea of being the underappreciated, over-delivering team. And so I think you ask a typical fan or even a player on the team, it's like, no, don't rank us. Like, just let us start unranked and work our way up, and we'll have that proverbial chip on the shoulder, and we'll use that as an advantage if they can channel that energy in the right direction.
Completely hypothetical, so no way of knowing, but if Jake stays and is not facing a suspension, none of that goes down, where do you think they land?
I would put them probably between 16 and 18 in the media poll if Jake Retzlaff is still the quarterback. Now you've got like a real case for a team that has some continuity, right? They still have continuity, but when you bring back your returning starting quarterback and a team that feels like their defense is not going to have a lapse, or at least not a significant lapse, and there is I don't know why it is down here, but the fans they love the idea of being undervalued and then trying to make something more and say, see, we told you. But we'll see if they can do it again, because this time around with a full-on quarterback battle, like the question marks are totally fair, and I have no idea what to expect in that first game on August 30th.
I do think if you're a BYU fan, you take a little comfort knowing that A-Rod and Kalani have traversed the quarterback battle space for what, 3 straight years maybe, and they've made the right call every single time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, fair point. Like last year with Jake Retzloff and Gary Bohannon, it was like, man, it literally came down to the last week, and they're like, "Hey, we're gonna make Jake the guy, but Gary, you're right there." And so that was a tough one, and there was a lot of back and forth there because Gary's shoulder was better, and he looked really good, and I don't know that they were anticipating that happening, so that was a really tough decision there. And even going back to 2018, I think that was the last time. But A-Rod wasn't the offensive coordinator. That was Jeff Grimes, and it was Tanner Mangum versus Zach Wilson. And they opted for Tanner Mangum and his experience for the first 6 games. Then he got benched, and then comes Zach Wilson, and he starts his career. So that was really the last time I was like, oh, man, I have no idea what BYU is going to do at quarterback. And I don't envy the offensive coordinator that has to make that decision. Didn't in 2018, don't this year, because that's really tough. But, yes, to your point, like, this is not something that is brand new, and they're like, oh, what do we do? Like they have traversed this, and if they can just name a guy internally at least a week out, then that's probably an okay scenario. But I don't think most of us in the media and in the public are going to know who the starting quarterback is until we see him run out with the offense in the first series of the season.
Tell me about the O-line. Ultimately, that's where it starts. And Kalani, of course, learned a lot of his trade under Kyle, and Kyle wants the trenches. Every coach wants the trenches dialed in. And BYU with some losses on that O-line. How's it shaping up?
Yeah, they are expecting a lot from a guy like Bruce Mitchell at center to take over for Connor Payne. The good thing for Bruce is Connor got injured last year, and Bruce had to start at center in multiple important Power 4 games. So they feel like for the most part, won't skip a beat with the guy who's ready and experienced it. And so they feel like they have their center and their captain on that line. The addition of Andrew Gentry, the Michigan transfer, is huge, and the experience and perspective that he brings, he'll be the right tackle. So that should really help BYU feel confident on that side. Isaiah Jota is going to be the blindside protector. I talked to TJ Woods, the offensive line coach, about Isaiah, and he said, look, there are a few guys that have taken significant steps forward. Isaiah is one of those guys. I have a lot of trust in him, so I feel very good about the 2 tackle positions. And then Waylon Lapuaho might be he's certainly the vocal leader on that offensive line, but he brings a ton of experience, and he's gone through the rigors of a full Power 4 schedule. So you have most of your key components. I think the biggest question mark about the offensive line is how deep are they? Like after the starting 5, what do they have? And that's what TJ said. He's like, camp for me is going to be figuring out who guys 6 through 9 are, so that we can know what happens if and when inevitably there is an injury. What can Austin Leusa do? And, some of these other younger guys we're developing, like that's the biggest question mark is the starting 5, like the opening 5, 6 guys, very confident. The depth is where the concern lies with positions like 6 through 9 when those injuries happen.
Both Utah and BYU have a bit of a soft landing into the season with some non-conference games. Portland State, the opener for BYU, then Stanford at home. Stanford fired Troy Taylor. Frank Reich is in as an interim coach, and it's an agreement from both sides that it's a 1-year deal. And then it's at East Carolina prior to launching into conference play. Do you like the soft landing just because BYU's breaking in a new quarterback so you kind of can see what sort of hand you've been dealt before conference play?
Yeah, it's interesting that it worked out that way, because at first I was like, man, I'd like to see BYU play kind of one of those banger non-conference games with an experienced core returning. But when the Retzloff situation went down, it's like, oh man, this is actually beneficial that BYU can ramp up. And frankly, the first 6 games of the season for BYU are a necessary ramp to the back 6, because beginning with Utah in game number 7, it just is a gauntlet for about 4 or 5 straight weeks, because now you've got Utah, and then BYU's got to go to Ames and play at Iowa State, and then they have a bye week, and then they'll play in Lubbock against Texas Tech, who's holding one of the most expensive and talented rosters they've ever had in program history. And then you got to come home and play TCU. So it's just like, whoa, in mid-October to mid-November, there's a lot there for BYU. So I do feel like the first 6 games in general are just a natural ramp up because BYU is not going to face a world beater in non-conference, Portland State, Stanford, or East Carolina. Colorado is an intriguing Big 12 opener. Not sure what they're going to be. Deion Sanders said they're a more talented team. They don't have as much individual talent as they had last year, but he believes they're a better team overall. So take that for what you will. And then BYU's got a couple of games that I feel like they should be okay in. A home game against West Virginia, who has to travel a long way on a Friday night, and then Arizona on the road. We don't know what the heck they're going to be under Brent Brennan as he's trying to save his job. So it really is a great opportunity for BYU to break in a guy, and I think that it's not outlandish to think that the Cougars can go 5-1, even with a brand new quarterback, against those 6 opponents. If BYU can be 5-1 going into the Utah game, then they should feel very, very good about their chances, to win 8 games and try and go 3-3 in that back 6 and be going into a bowl game at 8-4.
Talked about this earlier with the coaches poll released yesterday and the AP coming out on Monday. I need 3 or 4. I need 3 or 4 games before I can. I always say observation, not conclusion, the first 3 or 4 games of the season. Now, the complication with this dynamic when it comes to a conference is you could go 0-3 in non-con, turn it around and do fine in conference play. But how long do you need before you feel like you have an accurate read on exactly who BYU will be this year? How many games do you need under your belt?
I'm not far off of what you're saying there, Spence. I feel like I have a really good idea of what a team is probably 4 games into the season, because I think you've seen at least one conference game, and you've seen them work out some of work off some of the rust, work out some of the kinks in things through those 3 non-conference games. So if I saw the first poll like the first week of October, I think that would be awesome. Because I feel like we really know, like, okay, we have a way better idea of what these teams are, and you can avoid a situation like we had with Florida State last year where they're a top 10 team and they lose in the opener in Ireland to Georgia Tech, and we're like, oh, maybe it was a fluke. And then the wheels just absolutely fell off, and they were an absolute dumpster fire a year after being a college football playoff contender. So, I'm probably 4 games, and then we're good. Give me the first poll in October. But I understand that we're in a business that drives advertisers and ratings, and we need context, and we want people to watch games early, and that's why we have the preseason AP poll and the coaches poll, because we want people to watch the product. We want people to pay attention to our shows, and it gives us fodder to talk about. So trust me, I understand both dynamics, but if I had my way, first poll in the first week of October would be the way to go.
I had a chance to catch up with Brian Santiago, Big 12 Media Day. What's it been like first couple, I guess months now on the job? I mean, it's tough to follow a guy like Tom with the job he did. And we know Brian was his right-hand man. And, it does feel like he has inherited a very advantageous situation for an AD because it just feels like things are ticking down there, honestly, in a way that it hasn't felt like for quite some time on both the men's basketball and football side. And then, a lot of the Olympic sports, high level as well. So fan interest, ticket sales, business of sport at BYU seems good. What's it been like having that new AD for a little while now?
Yeah, I joked with him. I actually spoke with him this morning and joked with him like, hey, you signed up at the perfect time. Nice, easy transition into revenue share. Your starting quarterback leaving the program and going through that craziness. And then sold out arenas and students being mad because they're not enough rock passes and season ticket holders wondering if they're going to be able to be in the building. And, we kind of, joked about it tongue in cheek, but I mean, ultimately he said this is a first world problem, no doubt about it. I'm so grateful, and I'm using his words to see the passion and the commitment for BYU athletics at an all-time high. And I mean, he keeps using the word just like unbelievable and unprecedented, but he's genuinely excited about what's going to happen. He did point out the biggest challenge ahead of BYU is now that there are expectations out there, especially for the men's basketball program. Like, how do they rise to the occasion? Can they meet the expectations, which really haven't been there? Certainly not like this, but that's the challenge now. Is can we rise to the occasion, meet the expectations? Can this basketball team put it together and go to an Elite Eight, or be a legitimate national championship contender? And can football replicate what they did last year? Can they make it so last year wasn't a fluke? Can they go out and be a legitimate contender to get to a Big 12 championship game? So that's the challenge. But I believe he is genuinely excited and thrilled, and is aware of the concerns and complaints that happen when everyone wants to be in the building and can't. But and I'm glad that he's open to admitting that he's learning as he goes. He's like, man, I feel like I'm learning a lesson every day. Just, you think you have an idea of something that's going to happen and how people are invested, and then it's just like, whoa, the investment is even more, and we're just trying to figure it out as we go. But that guy just getting through one day at a time. When he says just one day at a time, like I believe he's living it, and he means it, and he's exhausted, but he's really excited about just the general momentum of BYU athletics and even the Olympic sports you talked about with, my gosh, silver medals in the Paris Olympics, and one of the runners being nominated for NCAA Woman of the Year, Lexi Halliday Lowry, and just national championships being won in track and field, on top of a nice pedigree that you already have with women's volleyball and soccer. And so, yeah, pretty wild time. But can BYU rise to the occasion? I think is something that we're all very interested to see.
Before I set you loose, you probably can't talk about the Dean Rucker kid, right? The new prospect that signed for 26, yeah?
So it's funny, like, we can't talk about him on a university-based program, like say his name officially. But
okay.
On your show, I'm happy to talk about him. Yeah, Dean's just another big get, like another 4-star guy, and another important in-state win for Kevin Young. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Lee Kamard, honestly, in what he does, and he's a little. I don't think he'll be as skinny as Lee. Lovely, but I really like what he brings to BYU basketball, and no question, it's hard for a young man like that not to notice what's been happening at the Annex and seeing the likes of AJ Devonta and Rob Wright III and Richie Saunders and these big time star guys, and watching practice, and like there's real energy there. So huge good get for BYU. Really like his game, and man, I think he's going to score a lot of points for BYU.
To expand the question to more of a macro standpoint, I know you referenced that BYU fans would prefer to fly under the radar. Well, I don't know how many people really understand what this basketball team has. November 15th, UConn in Boston. And look, it's really tough, Spencer, because you know me, I'm a basketball guy, and I love college hoops. I know a lot of people around here don't and think it's changed in a way that, for people like us that grew up with Duke and UNLV and those great Utah teams in the 90s and some great BYU teams back in the day, maybe it doesn't land the way it once did. And because of the nature of the tournament, I always hesitate to say you should go to a Final Four. You should be a Final Four team, because every year there's a sprained ankle, and then there's a random super senior that hits 12 threes, and suddenly you're going home. Like, crazy things happen in the tournament.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say, on paper, this should be a team that, if things go their way and they stay healthy, a Final Four is a legit possibility. It's not just AJ. It's the Rob Wright kid. Kennard Davis comes in from Southern Illinois. They get Richie back. Top-end NBA talent, depth, and a coach who's proven he could do it. Are BYU fans seeming, in your mind, to understand what they're in for? Even though everyone's excited about football, this is a basketball team unlike that I think anyone's seen down there.
Yeah, and come on, let's be real. Like, as exciting as football is, I feel like there is a strong, growing contingent of the fan base that is more excited about BYU basketball, because this is a brand new stratosphere, and this isn't just going to another level. They've taken this thing another 10 levels up, and that, honestly, it's kind of hard for fans to not be a little scared and have some trepidation about, oh gosh, like, do we really want to go all in on like this idea that BYU could go to their second Elite Eight and then maybe get to their first ever Final Four? It's just like this emotional disconnect because it hasn't ever legitimately since maybe when Jimmer Fredette and Brandon Davies was still in the mix, like that year was like, oh my gosh, BYU really is good. But even then, they had time to like kind of like work into that. You're starting the season, and you got several local broadcasters, yourself included, me included, and national guys, John Rothstein and Fran Fraschilla saying, "Oh, BYU is Final Four good. They are Final Four good." We've never experienced that in Happy Valley. Like it hasn't ever been there. So it just feels like there's some hesitation to fully embrace it because of fear of maybe being disappointed. But come on, that's what sports are about. Like, it's what being a fan is about. Just go all in, understand that this talent level is unlike anything we've ever seen before, and go with it. And if health remains good, yeah, BYU is Final Four good, which is a crazy thing for me to say. And even I am still trying to come around to like fully diving into that. But I've been in practice. I've seen them. Like, they are. It's just another level. They are absolutely good enough to get to an Elite Eight and make history and get to a Final Four.
No doubt. All right, buddy. Appreciate the time. As one of the last Spencer standing, I always enjoy our conversations. Have a great week. We'll chat soon, okay?
All right, brother. Good to talk to you.
All right, Spencer Litton, BYU TV. BYU still looking for a quarterback prior to their opener against Portland State. Dave Bartu, College Football Matrix on the other side of 4 o'clock. Richard Smith is a guest of ours today as well. Utah Jazz made a trade. Minivan's coming home. RJ Luis goes to Boston. George Niang and 2 second-round picks come to the Utah Jazz. And we'll get somebody's thoughts on the news that Dame Lillard will be the general manager of Weber State basketball later on. The crack of the bat, the pop of the ball, baseball season is heading into the home stretch, and it's time for your team to get in the game. Treat your lawn this month with IFA spring and summer lawn food. It's blended locally and formulated especially for Utah soils. It grows a healthy, lush, and thick dark green lawn. Just another of our 4 easy steps. You can find out more online at ifa.coop. More coming up on the other side of a Tuesday edition of The Drive right here on ESPN 700. Speaking of driving my car, the minivan is back.
Yeah, there we go.
George Niang has made his triumphant return to play for the Utah Jazz. I got to admit, and this mostly is a me problem, I think most nicknames are horrific.
Yeah.
And I think most nicknames that broadcasters try to make up are really, really bad. The minivan's pretty good.
I like it.
It's not bad. And also, I believe it was George himself who nicknamed, he coined the nickname himself because I think he was asked a question about, like, Donovan's athleticism.
Right.
And he said something like, Donovan's like a, I don't know, nice Lamborghini or something. I'm just more like a minivan. Because it works. George is not, how to put this gently, George is not built the way that most high-level NBA players are built. Is that fair to say?
George is built literally as he is like a guy who has had a lot of beers in Iowa.
Which he has done.
A lot of beers and a lot of corn. That's George Niang.
And also, George lived in the same apartment complex I did for a while. He lived up with the NBA players like Derek Favors, like the nice apartments. I was in a normal person apartment.
Of course, sure.
And I can tell you, walking into certain pool scenarios or party scenarios in said facility, he likes to have a good time.
Yeah, he does. You always hear stuff about guys that are playing here.
Mm-hmm.
George was always apparently out in the town having a really good time. I think he will continue to do so. Luckily in Salt Lake, you're not going to get in too much trouble if you're just out smashing natty lights like it appears George likes to do. But I think he's also a guy who maybe not, an elite defender. Good locker room guy.
Mm-hmm. So. Whenever somebody says good locker room guy, it's code for he's not very good at basketball. Do you think George is a natty light guy?
I think I, at least at one time, saw him drinking a natty light. But, maybe not specific to that. I don't think he's a bad NBA player, and I think he plays beyond sometimes what his physical limitations might appear. Really good ball mover. I think he's a really good communicator on the floor. So, could be worse.
Well, it's a low-risk move. The Jazz get 2 second-round picks attached, and essentially it's taking on George's salary for a player in R.J. Luis that probably was not going to play. And the Celtics said, okay, if you take Niang's salary, we'll also attach 2 second-round picks to it. The Boston motivation is getting under the second apron. George is 32. That makes me feel old. I feel like he just came into the league. He was a really good 4-year player at Iowa State. Ultimately, this is not a trade that means anything. To Porter's point, he's a vet that knows the city. He's a vet that knows how to be a pro. And honestly, because of that approach, it's kind of a little Jared Dudley-ish. Like Jared Dudley, the final 4 or 5 years of his career, couldn't play at a 24-hour fitness. But a pro that did everything the right way. And so if you're a GM and you want a low-risk addition to your locker room, you could do a lot worse than a guy like George Niang.
Well, and you go to a college campus, and Spence, there are multiple instances where there's a former player who he might not be on the coaching staff, but he's there and he's getting paid and he's practicing. Sometimes he's in uniform. Sometimes he's doing film cut up. Sometimes he's this is something that, you don't see it in the NBA on that level, but you can have a guy where he's on your roster and he's not necessarily on your roster to be a rotation piece. He's on your roster to help young players, number one, learn a system that he already knows, learn a lot of basketball and NBA things that he already knows. And I think George Niang is a pretty good candidate for that. And like you said, he's familiar with the city, he's familiar with the organization. And, all accounts, he's a pretty good guy.
Are we back to the moniker that pups can't raise pups? You remember last year when they signed Patty Mills and Drew Eubanks and we're like, what the hell are you doing?
Right.
And Zanuck or whoever would address the media. It's like, hey, pups can't raise pups. And then this year, it's all pups. So are we going to hear somebody utter the phrase when they announce this, once again, that pups can't raise pups?
Well, pups that can't raise pups in the wild just they don't get anywhere. So if it's just pups, they have to figure it out in some way. But it may not be pretty, but they'll figure it out.
But if a pup figures it out without like a savvy guide, doesn't that pup turn out to be like a badass wolf or something?
Can be.
I'm stretching. You're the nature expert.
Can be.
Okay.
Some sort of lone wolf. I think so. It'll iron sharpens iron. So if these guys are working towards the same goal, I don't know, maybe it'll help them.
Iron does sharpen. Do you think the Jazz have a next man up mentality?
Maybe not yet. They need the starters in order to have the next you need 5 in order to have the next man up.
That's
basically.
true. They need more than like one good player. George's best year was probably in Philly, the year after he left the Jazz. He had a decent year in Cleveland when he was reunited with Donovan. It's been kind of interesting. So he leaves the Jazz in 21, goes to Philly, and then lands in Cleveland, plays with Donovan again, and actually spent some time with Atlanta last year playing with Quinn. In 28 games for Atlanta last year, 12 points. Why am I reading George Niang's stats on air? You know what? Whatever. None of this is pertinent to the role he's going to play for the Utah Jazz. To Porter's point, a vet, safe guy that you can bring into the locker room, show the young players how to be a pro, knows the city. Don't know how familiar he is with Will. But an unexpected move made by the Utah Jazz today. R.J. Luis is a Boston Celtic, George Niang, and 2 second-round picks come this way to Salt Lake for the Utah Jazz. ESPN 700, well, some of us, we're pleased to welcome Simple Plan with Bowling for Soup. I don't know why I find that band name so funny. Simple Plan, Bowling for Soup, and 30H3 to the Plaza at America First Field, August 16th, 2025. Make sure to tune in to the Sean O'Connell Show for your chance to score a pair of tickets to Simple Plan, Bowling for Soup, and 30H3 at the Plaza at America First Field, August 16th, 2025. All right. 2 hours down, 2 hours to go. More college football on the other side. The college football matrix, very fascinating guy. He might be selling gummies. He might be hunting for elk. He might be in India. I don't know. We'll see where Dave Bartu is. He's going to join us. And then Smitty stops by as well during the 4 o'clock hour. Launch into the 5 o'clock hour of the program. Then we'll say goodnight at 6 o'clock. Busy Tuesday show. Good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. I got 2 hours in the books. We have 2 hours to go. Smitty's going to join us today. 40 years with the Utah Jazz. Jazz made a trade today. George Niang on his way back to Salt Lake to play for Will Hardy and the Utah Jazz. 2 second-round picks attached to that deal. R.J. Luis heads to the Boston Celtics. But let's do some more college football. And I just never know what's going to happen when our next guest is on the show, but it's always entertaining. Dave Bartu, College Football Matrix. All right, Dave, where are you at? What are you doing?
Dude, I swear I'm sober for this show, man. Come on, give me a break.
All right. No, but for real, where are you right now?
No, I'm actually I'm sitting on my deck, and right next to me is my bow because I just got done building a whole new arrow setup for archery season, and I'm sighting in my bow from 20 to 60 yards right now.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I'm going to dig deeper and ask for some fun off-season stories. Where have your travels taken you during the college football off-season?
Probably the best college football one is South Carolina for a week. We have a new program for early player identification for athletics, and just finding kids either off the beaten path or before anybody else does, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds before they get to camp. I kind of toured the state, rolling the whole thing out statewide. So really excited about the direction of that.
Very nice. So around these parts, University of Utah football fans hopeful that last year was a moment in time and not the new normal for Utah football. What gives you the most confidence that year 2 in the Big 12 will look better for Utah than year 1 did, Dave?
All of it. Everything. I mean, I still – look, I know fans love recency bias, right? That's the biggest thing about being a fan. What happened last game? What happened last month? What happened last year? There's probably a lot of people, pushing the panic button. But, years like that happen. And I still go back to my position on where I was a year ago. It is one of the most talented teams in the Big 12. It is one of the best coach teams in the Big 12. Got one of the best head coaches in the Big 12. None of that has changed. Okay, you had a bad year. I get it, and that's called college football. Stuff happens. But in my opinion, I don't think there's another team in college football that has the ability to bounce back from 2024 as hard as Utah Utes.
I know I ask you this every time you join, but just for listeners that may not be familiar, one of the things you do that I've always enjoyed learning about is you rank staffs. You rank coaches, you rank coordinators. So Utah, once again, Coach Witt is back. Morgan Scalley, coach and waiting defensive coordinator, but new offensive coordinator Jason Beck. How do you analyze and rank the current iteration of the Utah coaches?
We like his upside. Now, he hasn't been an offensive coordinator. He hasn't handled enough games to get a full OC grade relative to everybody else. But we have a really good trend on him. And as a young offensive coordinator, we like the direction that he is going. So we're real positive about it, but at the same time, not a big sample size. So let's not get too far over the skis, but I cannot say I don't dislike the hire. I like the risk, and I think there's a lot of upside to what he brings to the table going forward.
He also brings a quarterback that this program badly needed, and Cam Rising will always be a legend around here for a couple of Pac-12 championships, but the poor kid could not stay healthy. Cam moves on. He's now the offensive coordinator of his high school, so he'll be entering the coaching ranks. But what's the Dave Bartu take on the new QB1 here in Salt Lake, Devin Dampier?
Well, something what I would do with any quarterback. It doesn't matter is how many starts has he had, and what did he do to elevate his team relative to expectations? Kind of like Coach Witt. What has he done with the talent to elevate the team beyond what he recruited? So I guess I would ask the question of anybody, with the new quarterback, how many starts, and did he elevate the team beyond what people expected out of him? And if the answer is positive, then I don't know how you not be positive about what he brings to Utah.
The dynamic of moving up in competition, whereas New Mexico, Mountain West Conference School, and now Devin Dampier is playing in the Big 12. Certainly plenty of examples, namely Cam Ward, recently number 1 overall pick, of players who've been able to make that jump and do it at a very high level. I don't know if you have data for this, but when it comes to, group of 5 quarterbacks making the move into what now is the P4, what sort of insight do you have there?
Nothing really, other than like I said, is did they elevate where they're at before? Look at Cam Ward. Did he elevate Incarnate Word? Yep. Did he elevate Washington State? Yep. Did he elevate Miami? Oh my gosh, yes. He made a guy with almost no play calling experience in Shannon look awesome, right? Look at Pavia, New Mexico State to Vanderbilt. Boom. Elevated New Mexico State. Now he's elevating Vanderbilt. So while you can say, people would like to say, well, it's really hard to make that jump, I just go with kind of like what I do with coaching. If you're good, you stay good no matter where you're at. Would Morgan Scalley be a good DC at any place in the country? Yeah, right? He can go to Alabama. He's going to be really good. He can go to New Mexico. He's going to be really good. So, the New Mexico offense, everything was solid down there. He certainly won above expectations. And so my take would be I expect him to win above expectations at Utah as well.
Morgan, as you know, Dave, is the coach in waiting, and there are more than a few people that believe that transition will happen at the end of next season. I don't know. When it comes to Coach Witt, I've always said as long as he's under contract, he's the coach. And like when he decided to come back this year, there was a press release that was a very simple statement, and I just wasn't surprised based off of the disappointment of a year ago. And Kyle was very honest during Big 12 media days that disappointment did color the context of his decision-making process. But I know you also analyze coordinators in addition to head coaches. So should the transition happen next year, what are your thoughts on the potential of Kyle stepping down and Morgan sliding over a seat? What do you think that looks like?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on two things in particular. Certainly the culture, continuity, the coaching continuity is going to be there. But I think it depends on how good the offense is this year. Does Morgan have to make a change this year or when he comes in? And who's he bringing in as a defensive coordinator? Is he going to call the plays for the first couple of years and take less risk, or is he going to go next man up, promote somebody behind him, or is he going to bring a DC in brand new altogether? So there's a lot of pieces in terms of that puzzle and answering that question. I think it really is going to revolve around how much staffing Morgan has to do and how much staffing he's willing to do when that time comes.
So ultimately, last year, the Big 12 preseason media poll proved, that none of us know anything as far as what we're talking about. It was wild the way it was flipped upside down. And we didn't do a preseason media poll in the Big 12 this year, which is probably the right thing to do, so we all don't look like morons. But in addition to Utah, who you like, who else in the Big 12 do you think will have a chance to be standing at the end?
Well, I think you got to go with your best talent and your best coaching, right? I mean, your best talent, your best coaching, still Utah. Really good head coach, still Kansas State. I know everybody loves Arizona State, and I love Arizona State simply because I think Sam Leavitt is just an amazing quarterback. Because if you look at their offensive coordinator, Arroyo, when he doesn't have an awesome NFL quarterback, Justin Herbert, Oregon, he is a bad offensive coordinator. So I think one of the easiest measuring sticks of teams regressing and progressing is look at their recruiting levels. And so I think Arizona State, I think Colorado, both those teams last year played way above their expectations. So I think we're going to see some regression there. I think you're going to see some progression in Utah. I think it's going to be Kansas State. And I'm not buying all the excitement with Oklahoma State because, Gundy clean house, but he brought a bunch of average fossils into that thing, and I just don't think it's going to work that good.
I would imagine BYU outshot expectations a year ago by a long shot, and even by their own admission. We had their athletic director on the show during Big 12 Media Days, Brian Santiago, and I was surprised that he actually admitted, because BYU fans don't love to admit when they get great luck. He said the ball bounced our way all year long. And they're breaking in a new quarterback. Jake Retzlaff is now at Tulane. We don't know who the starter is going to be. If I'm recalling correctly, I think you like Kalani. They've got Aaron Roderick as their offensive coordinator, Jay Hill. Now year 3 as their DC. What are your expectations for the BYU Cougars this year?
I do expect a little regression, but Kalani has been plus coach effect for his entire career, about a game and a half. So I think BYU is still going to perform above expectations, but I don't think it is going to be the ceiling as high as it was last year. I think there just has to be some regression in regards to that, but still. Great football coaching. Actually, the whole state of Utah, between Utah and BYU, even Utah State now, there is really good coaching there. But I do believe and feel that BYU is due for a game or two regression in 2025.
How do you think the QB storyline will affect them? I mean, Jake was 11th in the Big 12 last year in QBR. They won a lot of games, again, based off of a lot of lucky bounces and some really, really stout play on the defensive side of the football. They return a lot of players on defense. They've got a stacked running back room and a lot of good wide receivers. But whoever takes the snap against Portland State opening day will be playing quarterback for BYU for the first time. How do you think that's going to affect them?
It's got to affect them, right? I mean, it is, unless they get lucky. You know how it is. In college football, sometimes you just find that diamond in the rough, and they get coached well, and they're a great player. But typically, kids that do great in their first year in college elevated their high school team, right? In terms of quarterback effect, we just talked about the guy transferring with Beck from New Mexico. So whoever's taking the ball at BYU, what did he do for his team in terms of elevating it? That's what I'd be looking at. But, the players are there. It is really hard, though, to have consistency, I feel, in the Big 12, especially at a very high level. The talent's very balanced. The coaching is very balanced and very good. I just think it's going to be difficult to repeat and put themselves in this position where they were last year in terms of playing for a playoff spot in November.
Always a little tongue-in-cheek about the coaches poll that was released on Monday. Ultimately, we've had a couple of college football guests on the show since the release, and it seems to be a consensus that most, if not all, coaches don't even fill out the thing. It's delegated to an SID or maybe even below that. How much stock, if any, Dave, do you put in the coaches poll that was released on Monday?
I don't put anything into any of them. It's all for entertainment. That's it. All of it's for entertainment. I was laughing when your commissioner, Big 12's like, we're not doing a media poll because it adversely affected our teams. No, your scoring efficiency adversely affected your team. That's what it was. It wasn't that, you weren't good at the beginning. Again, that's a selection bias that fans have. None of these polls have any effect. Nobody listening right now can show me a correlation year over year to playoff committee behavior and preseason polls. It doesn't exist. They use the same formula for ranking teams today as they did 10 years ago, and nothing, whether it's coaches' polls or anything else, affects that. It's just a wives' tale that people like to talk about, and I don't believe in it for a second. Just enjoy the rankings if your teams are there.
Well said. Now, having said that, Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, Georgia, Notre Dame, top 5. According to your model and your knowledge, just generally speaking, best teams in college football this year.
Oh, geez, man, this is going to be might be the best year of my life in following college football. I have no idea. I really don't. So last year, the 5 teams that checked off all the boxes to win the national title. None of this blue chip ratio crap where there's 17 to 20 teams that could be competing. That's all a bunch of knockoff BS is what it is. Last year there were 5. It was Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Notre Dame, and Texas. Those were the only competitors. And in the last 15 years, it has always been 3 to 5 teams. No more, no less. This year, there's 8. I throw out LSU, not even considering LSU, and I throw out Ohio State, not even considering them at all. But the other top 10 recruiters that are out there, look, they were all good last year. They all have good staffs, but everybody has a hole. Georgia has a new quarterback. Alabama has a new quarterback. Texas has a new quarterback. You go down the list. Penn State's got a new defensive coordinator, and they don't recruit in the top 10, and Jim Knowles' defense is tough. And whoever wins it, is going to be probably the least talented champion we've had in the last 25 years. But I think the crop of teams that are competing this year is bigger than it's ever been, and I'm excited to see it play out.
Let me follow up about Ohio State. You're the first person I have heard say what you just said about them. It feels like a lot of people still believe that they have a shot to win the whole thing. Why are you down on the Buckeyes?
Oh, I'm not down on them, and certainly they have a shot to win the whole thing. They get to play a schedule, and they're a top 10 recruiter. But look, okay, they got a new quarterback, never played before, right? They got a new DC who's never been a DC at the collegiate level, and they got a new offensive coordinator that has the same amount of play calling experience as you and me. Now, I know Ryan Day is right there to hold Brian Hartline's hand, but teams with a inexperienced coordinator, offense or defense, don't win national titles. They haven't, right? I don't think there's one in 25 years where you got a brand new OC or brand new DC that has won a national title. So do I think Ohio State still has a chance to repeat? Sure, but I put them in the second tier. It wouldn't surprise me, but they would still be a pretty big anomaly compared to the rest of the teams out there in the last 25 national champions.
Do you still believe we are headed? This is a topic we talk about around here all the time because the Big 12 is a fine place to land for now. It is. And if you're BYU, if you're Utah, you appreciate the fact that you're in a P4 conference. But there is this storyline narrative that permeates, kind of behind the scenes about what this sport is going to look like eventually. Do you still kind of believe we're headed towards this pro model with two conferences, if it's the SEC and the Big Ten, taking some of the leftovers from some of the other conferences? Or does it feel like things have calmed down, at least for the moment?
Answer a question with a question. Do you think America is still full of greed and will sell tradition for $1 at any cost?
Let me do some quick math. Yes, I do.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this is still heading towards this totally sucks. I hate it. I really do. As great as this country is, tradition is for sale. Everything is to the highest bidder. When I hear talks about private equity owning college football programs, think about that. Private equity owning college football programs. And I thought that was I thought it was nuts years ago. And now, look at the articles. Here's school valuations coming out. That's not by accident, right? So imagine Utah or Oregon or USC or Ohio State now being owned by private equity. Vomit. We already have the NFL where there's no upsets. There's no tradition. Nobody cares about they care about their teams, but it's just a bunch of teams that get into the playoffs. And we don't need another homogenous football league. But boy, does it feel like college football is just absorbing the greed and going right down that same path, tradition and everything else aside.
Seems like the topic of collective bargaining and players unionizing is a lightning rod, and it depends on what side you're on there. For me, Dave, I just, like you, I don't love the direction, but I'm also a grown-up, and I understand what capitalism means. And when NIL became a reality and transfer portal became a reality, I come from a background of pro sports. And so for me, if you want to solve some of these issues, namely keeping kids on campus for at least a couple of years or, bringing some sort of uniformity in what you can pay them, I do believe that the best route is to allow players to unionize and collectively bargain with whatever the powers that be that are running the sport is, and that changes from day to day. Do you think we're headed in that direction? Do you think it's the right thing?
Man, two different answers. I don't know what the right thing is because everything changes so quick. Nobody's happy with, what happened last year. It's just an instant oatmeal drive-through fast food society, and we don't take time to really take a break to think about long-term ramifications, it feels like. So, but to answer your question about collective bargaining, understanding the laws and the rules and so forth of how it's all laid out, to me it almost seems like it's inevitable. But again, how that's put together, what that looks like, when that's going to happen, I don't know when, but every single week, every single month, every single year, it just feels like the tradition and everything that we had in our sport, players being around for 4 or 5 years and identifying with a school just seems to be whittled away, and I think part of it, my emotion and attachment to it, gets whittled away along with it.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone there. Before you say you lose, again, along the lines of just accepting what reality is.
Yeah.
If the Big Ten wants 4 auto bids, and I know the SEC has kind of backed off that stance a little bit, but if the SEC and the Big Ten want 4 auto bids for an expanded 16-team CFP, they're going to get it, aren't they? If that's the hill they're going to die on.
Yeah, well, they got the gold. They make the rules, right? They carry the big stick.
Yep.
And, yeah, I guess they can try to die on that hill. That's fine. And you and I both know 1 year it'll work out, 2 or 3 other years it'll look stupid. But I don't blame them trying to leverage their position to ensure as many teams are in this playoff, no matter how many teams are in there, as possible. Can't blame them for that. And if that's the direction they ultimately want to go, that's fine. I don't know what any of us can do about that in terms of changing that outcome or their demands for automatic bids.
Last thing, 12 teams this year. Do you think the Big 12 can get 2 in?
No, sure. It just depends on how it plays out. Again, the ball's got to bounce right. Is it hard to conceive 2 12-0 teams in the Big 12 title game? Sure, it is. Is it hard to conceive 2 teams that are both 12-1 that can get in the playoffs? Yeah, it is. But it's possible, not probable, because the talent and coaching balance in the Big 12 is really, really tough. But look what Arizona State did last year. So I think that's one of the hopes that we all have in college football come September 1 or week 0 or whatever it is what is going to happen is a mystery to us. And I think knowing that any outcome is plausible, I think that's what makes college football still exciting.
Dave, thank you, sir, for the time. Always entertaining. Best of luck in whatever incredibly exciting endeavors you have coming your way over the next few weeks, and we'll get you back on again soon, okay?
You know where I'm at. Don't be a stranger, buddy.
Yes, sir. Dave Bartu, College Football Matrix. Get him on Twitter at CFB Matrix is where you found him. Find him, Some good stuff there. With the coaching dynamics in state, one of the things Dave has always done that I've found very interesting is he does deep dives on coaching staffs. He analyzes head coaches, coordinators, and then, juxtapose that with the talent you have coming back to try to understand the landscape of what college football is going to look like. And he nailed it when it comes to these preseason polls. It's fodder for conversation. And if your team is ranked, you enjoy it. If your team is not, you think it's a bunch of BS. We'll see what the AP brings coming up on Monday after the coaches poll was released yesterday. All right, we'll catch a break. Coming up on the other side, we're going to switch gears. George Niang, his triumphant return to Salt Lake City. The minivan is back. Some NBA offseason with Richard Smith. We'll get back to college football in the 5 o'clock hour. We'll say goodnight about 90 minutes from now at 6 o'clock on a busy Tuesday show. It's good to have you with us. Keep it here on ESPN 700. All right, I'll get back to the college football conversation during the 5 o'clock hour of the show. Our buddy Kyle Bonagura from ESPN will stop by. We'll say goodnight at 6 o'clock. Good stuff today. Spencer Linton, Dave Bartu, but let's do a little NBA. I'm here live in studio because I show up and I grind. Our next guest is Richard Smith, who is probably on a beach with his feet up, enjoying the sunshine. Smitty, where do we find you on this Tuesday afternoon?
Spence, you're missing the lead here. Like you're not telling the listeners that you spent a lovely week last week up in beautiful Sun Valley, Idaho. You just gloss over that and go right into your hard work schedule. I know that you have back again in the studio. That's tough for you.
Well, I'm not about yesterday's news. I'm more about where we are today, Smitty. So, yes, I am grinding live in studio. Where do we find you? Or would you rather just land on a location unknown?
Hey, Spence, no, I had to follow your lead. So you and your family, I know, were in Sun Valley last week, and I had to follow that lead. So I'm up in I went even further north and sitting out on the deck today at beautiful Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Ooh, nice.
And at the Coeur d'Alene Resort, and we had a nice round of golf there yesterday and went over to Circling Raven. It's about 20 minutes outside of Coeur d'Alene today. Another great golf course up here in this part of Idaho, and just 30 miles east of Spokane. It's an easy get from the Salt Lake, and having a great time here and great weather up here in northern Idaho.
Very nice, very nice. As I often say, it's good to be Richard Smith. So, Smitty, some breaking news as the minivan is making his way back to Salt Lake City. The Utah Jazz made a trade today. R.J. Luis Jr. goes to Boston. George Niang and 2 future second-round picks come to the Utah Jazz. George's salary is about $8 million change. It goes into the trade exception from the John Collins deal. If you're Boston, you're shedding salary. If you're the Jazz, I guess you're getting 2 second-round picks in exchange for absorbing George's money. But what are your thoughts on what the Jazz and the Celtics did today?
Yeah, well, I think in the grand scope of things, Spence, my opinion is that it's much ado about nothing. It's the Jazz are obviously still in asset acquiring mode, and they get a couple of second-round picks that they could use at some point or move those along as they see fit in future trades. And George Niang, who is a very serviceable player and actually came through the Jazz player development program, starting with the Salt Lake City Stars and then working his way up to the Jazz and played some good games and had some good contributions during his time. And actually, because of the work he did with the Jazz several years ago, played his way into a nice free agent contract with the Philadelphia 76ers at the time. And so I'm not sure what the thinking is in getting him. I'm not sure if they have to get to a salary floor as well, Spence, before opening day in October. So it could be something where he's filling that space for them. I'm not sure it really has anything to do with trying to, quote, improve the club or get someone who's going to be a major contributor going forward. But I know George is a good worker and he's a good guy. And, he'll help young guys in the locker room if that's what they're after. But I don't think it's going to mean much in the grand scheme of things in terms of the Utah Jazz and their winning and losing going forward.
Certainly, and as I stretch to make this a topic, it's interesting. Last year when the Jazz acquired Patty Mills and Drew Eubanks and some other borderline veteran players, the walking line from the coaches in the front office was, well, pups can't raise pups. Well, it's a much different approach this year because basically outside of Yusuf Nurkic and now George Niang, these are all kids. But I kind of drew the parallel, Smitty, earlier to the end of the career for Jared Dudley, who continued to find jobs, even though his best years were far behind him, because he was known throughout the ecosystem of pro basketball as a professional who could be a safe bet to help young players learn how to traverse this league and be pros while playing pro basketball. So what sort of, if any, benefit at all can that intangible dynamic bring if that's the idea the Jazz have here?
Well, Well, George is a great guy. He's a great personality. He never gets down. He's never in a negative space. Very similar to Jordan Clarkson, who obviously has moved on this summer to the Knicks. Maybe George is being brought in to fill that space as far as the locker room presence and how guys need to handle their business day in and day out. Usually, that influence is really more felt when it's with someone who would have a greater impact on the team in games than I would foresee George would have going forward. So I don't know. Haven't studied it. Like I said, there's a scenario where his addition could help them in the salary stuff, having to get to a minimum spending before the season starts. I could also see a scenario where they use that to get 2 second-round picks, and then they're going to do something with George before the season starts in terms of a buyout. But that will remain to be seen. I don't see anything other than being a good influence in the locker room if they think that's helpful. I don't know what that did because I wasn't there last year with Patty Mills. In the locker room, was a great guy. I don't know what it did for them, quote, growing up with the young guys, if that helped at all or not. That's up to the coaching staff and the guys who are on the floor every day with them in practice to determine what kind of influence that has. But George can be that kind of a guy if that's what they're looking for. He's just not going to have a great influence in terms of helping them to win games going forward.
Yeah, and I don't know they're going to be doing a lot of winning anytime soon. I will ask you about what sort of, and again, this is me stretching to find something topical, but since you and I last spoke, Kyle Filipowski was named MVP of the Vegas Summer League, not just MVP of the Jazz team, MVP of the whole thing. A lot of the other players, maybe a little bit left to be desired. Most of them were shut down. Sensabaugh had a couple good games and didn't play. Ace, Walter Clayton Jr., so it was tough to get a read on most of them, but what sort of, if any, I don't know, confidence or whatever can Kyle take from his summer league performance into year 2 for the Jazz?
Well, I think just for him and his own confidence, being able to play in that setting, the competition is great. They're mostly guys who are trying to make a team or trying to get a fall camp invite from someone. A lot of the draft picks that were in this June's draft, they didn't play either in the summer league for whatever the individual reasons were from team to team. But what it did give the Filipowski kid is a feeling that he could show what he can do, what his versatility is, skill-wise, and do that in front of everybody in the league. The whole league is there. All the general managers, all the other coaches, blah, blah, blah. And so, maybe if nothing else, it helps them to see him in that kind of a setting to be able to say, oh, yeah, now that kid, he can play inside, he can play outside, he has good footwork on the block, he can pass the ball, he can catch it in transition as a trailer and nail an occasional three. So people get to see that against guys who are all working hard because they're all those guys on the floor are hustling for jobs. And so, at least the competition and the effort is there by everybody you're playing against. And then to have the 3 performances he had, that says something about him and also was able to give people a look at just the skill level he has in general. And then, and now he goes into the fall camp and into the beginning of next season with some personal confidence that he can play like that. And now obviously the issue will be, does that translate against the big boys when he starts playing for real in October?
We're still a few weeks away from the opening of camp, but as these players start to trickle back into the market, and some of them have been here incrementally and others, go elsewhere for their off-season training, if you're Austin Ainge, if you're Justin Zanuck, if you're the Jazz front office and you're the Jazz coaching staff, based off of your experience, what are you looking for as they return, as far as whether or not they've been, doing the things they need to be doing during the off season?
Well, a lot of that, Spencer, your evaluation is an ongoing situation with individual coaches. The way NBA teams do it now, every coach has a player or two assigned to them. They have a regular workout schedule. They have a skill development schedule. They have a conditioning schedule. All these things are laid out, in notebooks and programs that the players are given, go over with their individual coaches consistently during the summer. If they're in town, obviously they're working out individually. If they're not in town, the coaches are checking on them to see how they're going and whatever that program is they laid out for that individual player. Sometimes, we used to send coaches, overseas when Rudy was on the team and he's in France. We would send a couple guys over there to work with him for a week and both conditioning and also skill development, weight training, and the coaches just want to keep a finger on it, make sure that they're doing what they're asking them to do and that they're making the progress that they're looking for, and they try and measure that in whatever facet they're looking for in each individual, and then they can monitor that all summer. So when they get here in early September and start getting settled for the beginning of fall camp, most of those players should already be rolling as far as all those areas are concerned, and there's very little catch-up time that the coaches need to do with them because they've been either talking with them or working directly with them all summer long. So it's just a continuation of that process, and that's a lot different, Spence, back in the old days, so to speak, when the likes of John Stockton and Karl Malone would be with the Jazz, and the season would end, and they would leave, several days later from Salt Lake and go home, their respective homes in Washington and Louisiana, and you might not see them again until the week before training camp or just a few days before training camp. And at that time, the approach was totally different. Guys were on their own to stay in shape, to figure it out, to make sure they were ready to go when they came back. But also, a lot of players back then used the training camp period as the time to get, quote, back in shape. And those days are long gone. When players come back now to their NBA cities in early mid-September, they have been going all summer long, and they most of the time they hit the ground running when training camp starts, and that's really in some part why the NBA has cut down from a high of eight preseason games that they used to play to now they only play 4 preseason games because the teams have been in such contact with their players and they kind of have already a feel for what their guys are in shape and what they're able to do when they get in town for training camp.
It is really tough, even after a few years, to analyze a few of these players as far as who they are in the league. But it is going to be a big year because there's some decisions that have to be made on some of these young players. Let's launch into a couple of these players one by one, and then I'll let you go. And let's start with Keontae. And Keontae is an interesting one because he's the one that we've seen the most. And there's been some good, but there's been too much bad for me to anoint him as somebody who can be a rotational player in pro basketball with the team that's trying to win. He clearly has some individual offensive pop. Efficiency numbers aren't good. Disinterested defender, to say the least. What do the Jazz need to see from Keontae this year so they continue to believe in this project?
Yeah, this is going to be a big year for him because he's got to show that he has some penchant, some ability to be able to defend and to be able to contribute in a defensive scheme where he's not always seen as the weak link. And if that's going to continue to be the process, then I would think he would have a hard time sticking around because I think that from my my gathering of information and talking to guys around the Jazz organization, Will Hardy and his staff, really want to be, some kind of a defensive team, have some kind of a defensive identity. They have not done that the last couple of years. In fact, it's just the opposite. They've been one of the worst defensive teams. And at some point, they've got to make a decision. Can this guy be part of where we're trying to get to, or do we just simply have to move on and admit that he just isn't the right guy for us? So him coming off the bench, throwing up a bunch of shots early in the second quarter, trying to get 8 points in a 2-minute span or whatever, that's not going to cut it. He's got to show that he's making consistent progress, on that other end of the floor. And if he doesn't, then they'll see that, and then they'll have to make a decision. But he's also on a rookie scale deal, so he's got this year, and the Jazz, can pick up their 4th-year deal on him before the season starts. Or if they don't, then that may be telling him, hey, this is it. You gotta fish or cut bait, so to speak, and because we got to get this train moving, and that may be part of the MO, under the direction of Austin Ainge now in basketball operations.
So I suppose it just simply is not realistic for Isaiah Collier to fix a jump shot in a matter of a couple of months. But I was hoping to see maybe some progress in the right direction during Summer League, and we just saw the same stuff. We saw a bullish, strong kid who can get to the 10 and is very athletic and strong, with some feel for the game and probably a better feel for the game than Keontae, hence the decision to start Isaiah and bench Keontae last year. So just same question, generally speaking. And then attached to the question, based off of your experience in player development, how long do we need to wait before we see whether or not tangible progress is made with the jump shot? Because I don't care how good you are in 2025 in the NBA, if you're a lead guard and you shoot 26% from three, you're not going to play.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right, and that's one of the things he's going to have to show. He's making progress, and a lot of that evaluation takes place in practice, because they're working with him every day, and they're going through drills, and they're going through having a shooting instructor working on his form and how he sets his feet and how he gets his balance and where his release point is and all those kinds of things. And they judge that, and they can track that, through various types of drills that they do during practice. And so they're getting a feel, even when he's not in game competition, to be able to see, is he making progress? Is he improving in these things? Is he just one of those guys who can't shoot? Jason Kidd, is a Hall of Fame player and a great playmaker and good size for his position, a good decision maker and floor leader and all that stuff. But Jason Kidd couldn't shoot. And, he improved somewhat during his career, but he never, improved to the point where you said, well, gee, now it's year 6, year 7, year 8. He should be making, good leaps in that regard. And he just didn't do it. He wasn't able to. That just wasn't his makeup. So, that might be something like the Collier kid, but at some point, again, the Jazz have to look at it as what their investment is going to be and what they think that return could be down the road. And again, Spence, we remind ourselves that all the guys we're talking about here, whether it's Filipowski, whether it's Collier, whether it's George, whoever, they're all in their early 20s. And so, they've got some growing to do, but they've got to show the coaching staff that they're trending in the right direction in the areas of where their major deficiencies are. Because if they're not, then the Jazz don't have time to wait around. They've got to make decisions and move on to the next guy, and that's the process they're in now, right? They're trying all kinds of guys and pulling them in, pulling them out, putting them in, and seeing if kind of throwing stuff against the wall and see if anything sticks. And that's the position they find themselves in right now, and in regards to their overall player development.
Who, in your experience, the answer might be Carl, because when Carl entered the league, he was not a great shooter, and he turned himself into a great, face-up jump shooter and a really solid free throw shooter. But the old saying, Smitty, in basketball is great shooters are made, they're not born. And there is a lot to like about Isaiah, but he does have to fix this issue because it's such a big issue. In your experience, is there a name or multiple names that come to mind of players that, 25, 26% from three put in the work and turn out to be really good shooters?
That's a good question. Guys who sometimes, if you're looking at guys, I can't come up with something off the top of my head, but I would say this in response to your question: guys who are showing that they make some kind of improvement, you have to leverage that against what else they do. In other words, I just mentioned Jason Kidd, for example, had a Hall of Fame career, and everyone knew he was a really good playmaker, very good decision maker, not great, but solid defensively with his size and his ability to stay in front of guys. But he couldn't shoot. He improved some, but not as much as you would have thought he would have during his career. But what he did do was the things he did very well, he did very well all of his career, and he showed that, and that's what made him eventually a Hall of Fame player. Somebody like Collier, they need to see some of that improvement. But like in his case, for example, him being a playmaker, he's got a good instinct, he's got a good feel with the ball, but he is so loose with the ball and makes bad decisions about driving into traffic and then trying to figure something out, or whipping a ball across court and it ends up in the third row in the stands. Those kinds of things also he has to curb, and he has to get in control, because otherwise that stuff tends to negate what you think is a good skill or a good trait that he has in bringing to the team on the floor. But if he's going to be inconsistent, where he gets 12 assists one game, and then the next game he has 3 assists and 7 turnovers or something, that's not going to cut it, because you got to be able to do the consistent things that you do well, night in, night out, because that's how the team is able to measure their progress in terms of getting better. So that's really, he's got a lot of areas to work on, but even the areas that he's good at right now or has a feel for, he's even got to tighten those up even more.
You think there's a chance Walter Clayton Jr. is the starting point guard for the Jazz on opening night?
Well, good question. Is there a chance? Yeah, I think there's a chance, again, because he's an older guy in terms of their group, Spence. He's older than those other guys we're talking about, because he was a 5-year college guy and has that kind of experience and big game pressure, and has shown that he's able to deliver in tough situations. Now, obviously, a different level of skill and a different level of talent, but he's shown that he can handle himself when situations get tough. And again, he's played those years in college that George didn't play, because he only spent 1 year in school. More years in college than Collier, who only played 1 year in school. And so he's got more experience than they do in that regard. And so, yeah, that's an interesting question. It'll be fun to see how he shows during training camp and how they choose to use him during their preseason games, and whether he plays himself into a starting role like that.
Moving over to Ace Bailey, who is a player that I think a lot of Jazz fans have hope for, and hope right now is something this fan base has not had and quite frankly needs. The list of players ready to play high-level pro basketball at that age is very short, and we didn't see a ton of Ace in Summer League. There are obvious things to like: the athleticism, the measurables. So I guess the way I'll frame it is, what needs to happen year one for what I perceive to be a little bit of hope from this fan base to be realized as a rookie?
Well, he just has to show that he can play, with a certain level of energy, a certain level of enthusiasm, of engagement, and show that he's able to learn from his mistakes, which there'll be plenty of. But does he keep making the same mistake over and over and over? Or does he seem like he's a guy who can understands that, what he tried to do last game isn't going to work? And so he changes it up tonight and the next game. But he's a young guy. And, the best thing about him probably is that he's with a team that needs a guy exactly like him. In other words, this is the type of player that affects winning in the NBA if you're at a certain talent level. Every team needs a guy who's 6'8", who's long, who's athletic, can play multiple positions if they have to, can do different things. He can rebound. He can push it up the floor on his own. He can advance the ball and find guys. He can create shots in the mid-range. I think the jury's out about his long-range shooting, but hopefully that comes in time. Again, we remind ourselves that he's going to be 19 during the season, but he's going to have a lot of opportunities, and he's going to have a chance to show the coaches, not just that he's obviously not going to be a finished product, but is he making improvement in areas that show that, okay, we need to keep working with him, we need to keep engaging him in the process, because he's going to be a guy that we want to be able to count on going forward. But he's going to have to earn that. You're not going to be given it. He'll get minutes, and he'll get opportunities. But like we're talking about Anthony George, at some point you have to produce the goods, and you have to show that, yeah, I can do this, and yeah, you can rely on me. And he's going to have those opportunities early, and they're going to have a long leash with him. He's their top 5 pick, and a lot is being made of him, and so he's gonna have several years to show that he's making improvement and can be one of the hopefully for them a foundational piece in what they're trying to build going forward. And it's good for him because he'll get all the kinds of chances he wants, and all he has to do is show that he's willing to work and improve and earn more playing time and earn more opportunities as his career embarks.
Smitty, my friend, I'll set you loose. You go enjoy the good life, and we'll see you soon in studio when you're back on the ground, okay?
All right, Spence. Good to be with you. Thanks, man.
All right, great Richard Smith. Utah Jazz made a trade today. George Niang is on his way back to Utah. The Celtics trade Niang and 2 future second-round picks to the Jazz for R.J. Luis Jr., and Boston saves money. They get under the second apron, and the Jazz add a couple of more second-round picks to their compendium of draft assets that at some point, hopefully, they turn into players that are good at basketball. So where Niang fits in the grand scheme of things, Smitty with some good stuff there. Maybe they buy him out prior to the season. Is George just wanting to come back to Salt Lake? Is he looking to play for a contending team? Bounced around a bit since he left Utah. He spent some time in Philly. Spent some time, a little bit of time in Atlanta, and of course Cleveland, where he went back and played with his buddy Donovan Mitchell. So a little bit of NBA news today that was somewhat surprising. Jazz making a deal. The Jazz at this point appear to have their roster set. Now, of course, things could change. Excuse me, more trades could come down, but they have the maximum amount of players on the roster as of now, and I do believe they've met the salary floor. I think with Niang's salary, they now meet the criteria to meet the salary floor. It's like $150 million and change. Lowry's on the books for $46.3. Nurkic, $19.3. Jordan Clarkson's salary is actually off the books. We'll see what happens. Kyle Anderson, Kevin Love, some of these veteran pieces, is there really a place for them on the team? So, obviously, a lot of college football, some NFL, but the Jazz and the NBA will be here before we know it. We'll catch a break. We'll get to the final hour of the program. Coming up on the other side, Kyle Bonagura will join us too. So keep it here on ESPN 700. All right, let's get a drive at 5 time, Tuesday afternoon style, 10 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock. It is a hot day, scorching hot Utah, August Tuesday. And as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic. Porter Larson producing the show Behind the Glass today. Going to bring in Kyle Bonagura from ESPN, covers college football for the worldwide leader. Really talented writer. He's got a new podcast featuring a very cool story about Paul Wolf, who once upon a time was the head coach of Wazoo. Washington State, played his college football there as well. I'll let him explain this project. I read the written portion of the description earlier today. He and Adam Rittenberg doing it for sure. It's a fascinating, gripping story. Paul essentially lost both of his parents as a young person, and I'll let Kyle kind of explain that to you. We chatted with Spencer Linton earlier today from BYU TV about the ongoing quarterback battle at Brigham Young between McKay Hillstead, Trayson Bourget, and Bear Bachmeyer. No news there as far as who the starter will be. Dave Bartu, College Football Matrix, stopped by. Very high on Utah's potential to bounce back this year 2 in the Big 12. After a tough year 1, Camp Kyle continues to roll along, and I'll take this opportunity to remind you that if you're looking for any Utah football camp sound, we have it all up on our website, which is ESPN700sports.com. Coach Witt, Morgan Scally, Jason Beck, Devin Dampier, etc., up on the website if you're looking for that to kind of keep your appetite going while we're waiting for game day, which is only 25 days away. Utah will be at the Rose Bowl to take on UCLA. And then Smitty stopped by live up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, to talk about the news that the Jazz have made a trade today. George Niang is on his way back to Salt Lake City. R.J. Luis Jr. sent to the Boston Celtics. The Celtics attached 2 second-round picks to the deal. Essentially, the Jazz absorb George's salary. They get a couple of picks for their troubles. Boston gets under the second apron and saves about $34 million. I want to remind you that our Camp Kyle coverage on the station brought to you in part by Jerry Seiner Cadillac, S&S Roofing, America First Credit Union, Mountainland Power Equipment, Advanced Window Products, The Steel Vault, Polylift, Keto's Brewing, Big Willie's, Budweiser, your Utah Toyota dealer, Sound Warehouse, Culligan Water, Beer Bar, Big O Tires, Baskin Robbins, Game Day Men's Health, The Advocates, and Outlaw Distillery. All right, we'll catch a quick break. Coming up on the other side, a good conversation with Kyle Bonagura, the world of college football. And also, does Kyle believe Diego Luna has locked in his spot to play for the U.S. men's national team in the World Cup next year? Then we'll say goodnight at 6 o'clock. Turn it over to today's best busy Tuesday show. Good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. Song will always remind me of Happy Gilmore. Speaking of which, have you watched Happy Gilmore 2 yet on Netflix? Have you checked it out?
I started watching it, unfortunately.
Not good?
It felt more like Grown-Ups than it did Happy Gilmore, which, it's kind of the route you're going in with our guy at this hour. But, I giggled a few times.
I have not watched it yet. I'm sure I will. And right now is probably a good time to check it out because due respect to the Little League World Series, which, by the way, Utah, Nevada tonight at 7 o'clock Mountain Time on ESPN. It's a good time to get caught up on shows and movies when there's just not a lot of sports going on. So maybe I'll check it out tonight. Also, well, you're going to guess the answer right because there's no other way for me to ask the question. The state in our country that has the most plastic surgery per capita is who?
This one.
It's Utah.
Yeah, I knew that.
Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
According to what I read, and I wasn't looking for the information, it just popped up. 13 plastic surgeons for every 1,000 residents.
Wow. I didn't know the exact number, but yeah, I did know we were up there.
Which is the most in the country. What does that say? I'm not trying to psychoanalyze. We don't have to intellectualize everything, but that's got to say something about culturally keeping up with the Joneses here, does it not?
Absolutely. There's a thing there. There's a little cultural aspect to an appearance and looking a certain way. There's also disposable income here, right? When you got all the bills paid, well, you might look at other things. So there's a litany of things that play into this. But yeah, there's certainly also a cultural aspect of trying to look good for your friends, your fam. I don't know.
Have you ever had plastic surgery?
No.
You're only 30.
Well, I could. My nose is. I've broken my nose 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
I got some crooked teeth. I got a chipped tooth at the moment. That's part of me. It's part of my story. I don't really care to fix it or make it look different.
All right.
But we'll see. Maybe a nose job in the future.
All right. Well, I guess if you live here, you're in good company. All right. Fun show today. A lot going on. Porter, what comes our way on a Wednesday edition of the program?
Yeah, on a Wednesday edition of The Drive, of course, we'll continue talking some off-season football, off-season hoops, maybe some baseball with our guy Tony Parks.
All right.
Dave Fox stops by. Of course, he'll be on TV with our friend Dave Fox a little bit later on. And on a match day, I think Jason Kreis will join us from Real Salt Lake. Some off-season football with Max Chadwick. Our friends from Fiddlers are going to be in studio. Yes, Fiddlers is returned to Sugar House. So a bunch on the show on a hump day.
Join us for a Wednesday show. That will be a fun program. We'll say goodnight and special thank you today to Kyle Bonagura, Spencer Litton, Dave Bartu, and Richard Smith. For any of the sound you may have missed, website ESPN700sports.com. Make sure to download our mobile app and take us on the go. Then finally, for what we do in our space every afternoon, check out our podcast page. It is called The Drive with Spence Checketts. It's available wherever you get your shows. Subscribe, rate, review, say nice things in the comments. Give us all the stars. He's Porter. I'm Spence saying goodnight. I'll be on TV with Dave tonight, 10:35 KMYU. We call it 5 Questions with Spence. Talk to you on a Wednesday show. As always, you can catch that right here on ESPN 700, 92 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN Radio Network.